My name is Diana. I am 33 years old, and I work as a senior forensic corporate auditor. Exactly 1 year after my brutal divorce, I ran into my ex-husband at the hospital. He stood in the crowded corridor, smirking down at me, while my former best friend stood beside him holding their 1-year-old son. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Leaving me was the best decision he ever made, because a useless woman cannot have children." I did not cry. I did not scream. I just smiled, checked my watch, and waited for the exact moment his entire fake life shattered into a million pieces. 2 minutes later, a man walked into that hallway, and my former best friend dropped her baby bottle in pure terror. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic people who underestimated your worth. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle. I was standing near the fourth-floor nurse station at Seattle General Hospital, waiting to pick up the post-operation discharge papers for my younger sister Sylvia. She had just undergone a routine appendectomy, and my mind was focused entirely on getting her home safely. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and held my leather briefcase tightly against my side. As an auditor, I spent my days tearing apart fraudulent corporate ledgers and tracking missing millions for high-tier clients. I was trained to remain completely devoid of emotion under extreme pressure. That training was about to be tested in the most spectacular way possible. I turned away from the reception desk holding Sylvia's medical chart. I took exactly 2 steps down the busy fluorescent-lit corridor before my path was abruptly blocked. Standing directly in front of me, blocking the entire width of the hallway, was Greg, my ex-husband. He was 36 years old, wearing an expensive navy blue custom suit and a smug expression that instantly made my stomach turn. Standing right next to him was Monica. She was 33 years old, and until 2 years ago, she had been my absolute best friend in the entire world. Resting on Monica's hip, dressed in a designer blue onesie, was a chubby 1-year-old baby boy. The sheer audacity of the ambush was staggering. I tried to sidestep them, but Greg intentionally shifted his weight to block me again. He wanted an audience. The hospital corridor was packed with nurses visiting families and doctors holding clipboards, but Greg did not care. He wanted to humiliate me in public. "Well, well, well," Greg announced, his voice booming loudly enough to make a passing nurse turn her head. "If it is not my cold, unfeeling ex-wife. What are you doing in a hospital, Diana? Did your frozen heart finally give out?" I stared at him. My resting heart rate stayed perfectly steady. "I am here for Sylvia," I replied, my voice completely flat and professional. "Step aside, Greg. I do not have time for your childish games." But Greg was not going to let his golden opportunity pass. He had spent our entire marriage trying to make me feel small to cover up his own deep insecurities as a wealth management vice president who constantly rode the coattails of his superiors. He puffed out his chest and looked down at me with an expression of pure, venomous triumph. He pointed a manicured finger right at my face. "You always thought you were so much better than me, Diana." Greg sneered, leaning in closer so the people sitting in the nearby waiting chairs could hear every single word. "You prioritized your stupid auditing career over giving me a family. You made me feel like I was never enough. But the truth is, you were just broken. You are a barren, useless woman. Look at what I have now. Look at this perfect, beautiful son. Leaving you was the absolute best decision I ever made in my entire life. I am so incredibly lucky to have a real woman like Monica who can actually give me a family." Monica chimed in right on cue. She shifted the baby boy on her hip and let out a high-pitched, condescending laugh. She reached up to brush a stray lock of blonde hair behind her ear, making sure the massive diamond engagement ring on her finger caught the harsh hospital lighting. "Oh, let her be, Monica," said her voice dripping with fake pity. "It must be so hard for Diana to see us so happy. You know, Diana, I honestly feel bad for you. You spend all your time chasing corporate frauds, but you could not even keep your own husband satisfied. You are going to grow old completely alone in your cold, empty apartment while we are out here building a legacy." She stroked the baby's fine hair, giving me a look of absolute toxic victory. He just started walking last week. Monica bragged, her tone sharp and vindictive. Greg is such a wonderful father. He bought us a $2 million house in Bellevue just so the baby could have a massive backyard. Something you could never give him because your body is a failure. The people in the hallway were actively staring now. A few women looked at me with pity. A man in a wheelchair shook his head. They all expected me to break down. They expected me to drop my files, burst into tears, and run away from the devastating sight of my ex-husband living a picture-perfect life with my former best friend. They expected the betrayed barren ex-wife to crumble under the weight of their cruel words. But I was a senior forensic corporate auditor. I did not deal in raw emotions. I dealt in hard, verifiable facts. And the facts I was currently holding in my back pocket were about to completely incinerate their manufactured happiness. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or hurl an insult back at them. Instead, I looked at Greg's smug face, then looked at the expensive diamond ring on Monica's finger. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and checked the time on the digital screen. It was exactly 10:14 in the morning. Really, Greg? I asked, my voice perfectly calm and laced with a razor-sharp edge. You think leaving me was the best decision you ever made? Greg frowned, his arrogant smile faltering for a fraction of a second. His fragile ego could not process why I was not crying and begging for him to stop. Yes, he barked loudly, trying to regain his dominance over the situation. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely woman, Diana. I smiled, stepping just a single inch closer to him. My eyes locked onto his, completely unbothered by his attempts to break me. Let us see if you still feel that way in about 60 seconds, I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the tense hospital corridor. Because the reality of your perfect little family is about to come walking right through those elevator doors. Greg let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. He glanced over his shoulder at the closed silver doors of the elevator bank and then turned back to me with a look of absolute, unadulterated contempt. He thought I was bluffing. He genuinely believed I was just a desperate, lonely woman trying to save face in a public hallway after being utterly humiliated. His massive, fragile ego simply could not handle the fact that I was not shattered into pieces. He needed to see me bleed. He needed to break me completely before those elevator doors ever opened. Greg handed Monica a small designer diaper bag and took a deliberate, aggressive step forward, invading my personal space. He leaned down so his face was mere inches from mine. The scent of his expensive custom cologne mixed with the sterile, sharp smell of the hospital corridor, making me feel briefly nauseous. He dropped his voice from a loud theatrical boom to a low, vicious whisper designed specifically to cut straight to my core where no one else could hear. You have always been a delusional, arrogant bitch, Diana, Greg hissed, his eyes narrowing into dark, cruel slits. You stand there in your cheap corporate blazer, checking your watch like you still have some sort of power over me. You have absolutely nothing. You are a biological dead end. During our entire marriage, I had to pretend it was okay that you were defective. I had to smile and hold your hand while you cried over negative pregnancy tests. But the truth is, I was completely disgusted by you. You were a bad investment, a broken, defective asset. Why would a man like me waste my prime earning years tied to a woman who could not even fulfill her basic biological purpose? Monica shifted the baby, resting her chin on his soft head, and smirked. She did not even have the decency to look ashamed of betraying a decade of our close friendship. She just stood there basking in the glow of the stolen life she had built on the ruins of my marriage. Greg wrapped his arms securely around Monica's waist, pulling her close to emphasize his point. He wanted to make sure I saw the picture-perfect family unit he had replaced me with. You thought you were so incredibly smart during the divorce? Greg continued, his whisper turning frantic with manic pride. You thought your fancy forensic auditing skills gave you the upper hand in mediation. You thought you stripped me down to my base salary. You made me sit in that stuffy lawyer's office and swear under oath that my liquid assets were divided perfectly down the middle. You really thought I walked away with just a fraction of my wealth because you cornered my legal team? Greg let out a dark, terrifying chuckle. He leaned in even closer, his breath hot against my cheek. I played you, Diana, he bragged, his arrogance completely blinding him to his own fatal mistake. I played you and your overpriced divorce attorney for absolute fools. You think a senior vice president at a top-tier wealth management firm just accepts a standard salary. You think I bought a $2 million estate in Bellevue with a conventional mortgage. I secured massive seven-figure executive bonuses months before I ever handed you those divorce papers. I funneled them through discreet channels right under your supposedly brilliant auditor nose. I hid millions in cash to ensure my real family had the luxury they deserved, while you got stuck fighting over the scraps of our joint checking account. The cruel insults about my body and my infertility completely evaporated into the sterile hospital air. My emotional processing shut down instantly, and the cold, clinical machinery of my forensic auditor brain booted up. Greg thought he was delivering a devastating emotional blow to a heartbroken ex-wife. Instead, he had just handed me a signed verbal confession to a severe financial crime. My mind began working at lightning speed, cross-referencing every single financial disclosure document Greg had submitted during our divorce settlement 1 year ago. Under penalty of perjury, he had sworn to a family court judge that his total annual compensation was capped at $250,000. He had sworn there were no external bonuses, no hidden portfolios, and no offshore routing accounts. But a $2 million Bellevue house required a minimum down payment of $400,000 in clean liquid cash just to secure the deed. Add the cost of Monica's massive diamond ring, the designer baby clothes, and the luxury vehicles they were undoubtedly driving. The math did not just look suspicious. The math was a screaming neon sign of criminal perjury. To bypass the intense scrutiny of my divorce lawyers, Greg would have needed to wash those executive bonuses through shadow accounts. If he was hiding money of that magnitude, he was using his corporate wealth management privileges to do it. He had just confessed to asset concealment, tax evasion, and lying under oath in a federal family court. He had handed me the exact thread I needed to unravel his entire existence. I cataloged every single syllable that just left his mouth, locking the confession away in a mental vault. I looked at his smug, gloating face. He was smiling so widely his eyes were crinkling at the corners. He felt completely invincible. He had successfully discarded his barren wife, upgraded to a younger model, secured a male heir, and financially outsmarted a senior corporate auditor. He truly believed he was the untouchable king of his own pathetic little universe. You really should not have told me that. Greg, I whispered back, my voice carrying a tone of absolute chilling finality, because perjury is not a civil disagreement. It is a federal felony. Greg scoffed again, rolling his eyes as he stepped back. Oh, please, Diana, he mocked, waving his hand dismissively in the air. Go ahead and call your lawyers. Tell them I bragged in a hospital hallway. There is absolutely no paper trail. You have zero proof. I covered my tracks perfectly. You are just making pathetic, empty threats because you know you lost everything and I won. His smile widened as he looked at Monica, who giggled and kissed the baby's plump cheek. He was so completely focused on his own perceived victory that he did not notice the heavy mechanical hum of the elevator arriving directly behind him. He did not hear the bright digital chime signaling that my 60 seconds were officially up. He just stood there waiting for me to walk away in defeat, completely unaware of the absolute nightmare waiting on the other side of those silver doors. The bright digital chime of the elevator arriving echoed sharply through the tense hospital corridor, shattering the sterile silence. The heavy silver doors slid open with a smooth mechanical hiss, perfectly synchronized with the exact moment my 60 seconds expired. Greg did not turn around immediately. He was too busy reveling in his own manufactured victory, too obsessed with watching my face for a reaction to care about whoever was stepping off the elevator behind him. But the sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure of the hallway was impossible to ignore. Stepping out of the elevator car was my brother-in-law, Kendrick. He was an African-American man standing at an imposing 6'4", with the broad, muscular build of a former collegiate athlete. He was dressed in a razor-sharp black tailored suit that perfectly matched his lethal professional reputation. Kendrick was not just Sylvia's husband. He was a high-powered federal attorney and a senior investigator specializing in medical fraud for the United States government. He possessed a commanding, terrifying presence that instantly silenced a room the moment he entered it. He moved with absolute predatory purpose, his dark eyes locked entirely on the back of Greg's head. But Kendrick was not walking alone. Marching in perfect step right beside him was Cameron. If Kendrick represented the crushing weight of the federal legal system, Cameron represented the terrifying volatile power of untouchable wealth. Cameron was a ruthless underground crypto broker known for moving massive amounts of unregulated capital through digital shadow markets. He wore a custom-tailored Italian silk suit with a platinum watch on his wrist that cost more than Greg's entire base salary. He was also one of the most lucrative and highly prioritized clients at Greg's wealth management firm. Greg had spent the last 3 years practically breaking his back to keep Cameron happy, constantly bragging about how he was personally managing the crypto broker's legitimate offshore investments. Cameron did not look happy today. His face was a hardened mask of pure unadulterated fury. The veins in his neck were visibly bulging against his crisp white shirt collar. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth might shatter under the immense pressure. But the most terrifying detail was his intense focus. Cameron was not looking at Greg. His burning, furious eyes were locked directly onto Monica and the baby boy resting on her hip. The heavy, rhythmic thud of their expensive leather shoes against the hospital linoleum finally forced Greg to turn around. He spun on his heel, an annoyed scowl forming on his face at the sudden interruption. But the moment his eyes registered who was standing right behind him, the arrogant sneer completely evaporated. His entire posture violently shifted. The cruel, vindictive ex-husband instantly morphed into a desperate, groveling corporate employee who had just been caught off guard by his most important client. Cameron! Greg stammered, his voice pitching upward in forced, overly enthusiastic surprise. He practically shoved Monica to the side so he could step forward and extend his hand. What a pleasant surprise! What are you doing here at Seattle General? If you needed me to review the quarterly portfolio reports, you could have just called my private cell. I would have come straight to your office. Cameron completely ignored Greg's outstretched hand. He did not say a single word. He just stood there vibrating with a lethal, aggressive energy, staring right past Greg's shoulder at the woman clutching the baby. Monica's reaction was instantaneous and entirely catastrophic. The smug, condescending smirk she had worn just moments ago melted off her face like wax held to an open flame. All the blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a terrified, hollowed-out ghost. Her eyes darted wildly between Cameron and the heavy manila envelope Kendrick was holding. Her breathing turned shallow and erratic. She knew exactly why Cameron was here. The intricate web of lies she had spun to secure her $2 million house and her luxury lifestyle was unraveling right in front of her eyes. Greg looked confused, his hand awkwardly dropping back to his side. He looked from Cameron to Kendrick, his brow furrowing as he tried to process why a federal medical fraud investigator was standing shoulder to shoulder with his wealthiest crypto client. He opened his mouth to ask a question, but Kendrick did not give him the opportunity to speak. Kendrick closed the remaining distance between them, stepping directly into Greg's personal space. He loomed over my ex-husband, forcing Greg to physically crane his neck backward just to meet his gaze. Kendrick did not offer a polite greeting. He did not ask how Greg was doing. He moved with the cold mechanical efficiency of a federal executioner delivering a fatal blow. Kendrick raised his right hand, holding a thick, heavily sealed manila envelope. With a sudden, aggressive motion, he slapped the heavy envelope directly flat against the center of Greg's chest. The loud smack of the thick paper hitting Greg's expensive navy suit echoed down the entire hospital corridor. The physical impact forced Greg to stumble backward a single step, his hands instinctively flying up to catch the envelope before it fell to the floor. "What the hell is this, Kendrick?" Greg demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and rising panic as his fingers gripped the edges of the paper. You cannot just walk up and assault me in a public hospital. What kind of game are you and Diana playing? I am not playing any games, Greg Kendrick replied, his deep baritone voice rumbling with absolute legal authority. His tone carried clearly down the hallway, commanding the attention of everyone standing nearby. That envelope contains a legally binding federal subpoena regarding a comprehensive medical fraud investigation. You are officially being served. I suggest you open it right now because the information inside is going to permanently alter the trajectory of your entire life. Greg stared at Kendrick, his mouth hanging slightly open. He looked down at the thick envelope in his hands, the federal seal stamped clearly across the flap, mocking his fragile ego. He could not comprehend how a routine morning of harassing his ex-wife had suddenly escalated into being served with federal medical documents. He slowly hooked his finger under the seal and ripped the envelope open. Behind him, the ultimate breaking point was finally reached. Monica could no longer maintain the illusion. The absolute sheer terror of facing the reality of her own actions overwhelmed her physical motor functions. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably as she looked into Cameron's furious eyes. The heavy plastic baby bottle she had been holding slipped straight through her manicured fingers. It plummeted toward the ground, hitting the hard hospital linoleum floor with a loud, sharp crack. The plastic cap shattered on impact, sending a massive splash of white formula erupting across the corridor. The liquid splattered violently against the polished floor, pooling around the tips of Greg's expensive leather shoes. The loud crack of the breaking bottle shattered the remaining silence in the hallway, causing the baby in Monica's arms to let out a startled, piercing cry. The absolute nightmare I had promised had officially arrived, and it was about to burn their perfect little world entirely to the ground. Greg stared down at the spilled white liquid soaking into the stitching of his Italian leather shoes. The piercing wail of the baby echoed off the clinical walls, but Greg did not move to comfort his supposed son. His eyes were glued to the first page of the medical documents, his hands shaking so badly the paper rattled audibly in the quiet corridor. He scanned the dense medical terminology, his brain completely failing to process the catastrophic information sitting right in front of him. He looked up at Kendrick, his face twisting into a mask of confused, frantic denial. "What is this garbage?" Greg demanded, his voice cracking as he waved the papers in the air. "This is a joke. This is some kind of sick forged document Diana cooked up because she is jealous. You think you can scare me with fake hospital records?" Kendrick did not flinch. He reached out with lightning speed and snatched the documents right back out of Greg's trembling hands. "Since your reading comprehension seems to be failing under pressure, allow me to translate it for the entire hallway," Kendrick said, his deep voice projecting with the absolute authority of a federal courtroom. Kendrick flipped to the second page, holding it up so the official hospital letterhead was visible. "2 months ago, your wealth management firm mandated a comprehensive executive physical and biometric screening for a newly upgraded $10 million corporate life insurance policy," Kendrick announced, ensuring every single person in the corridor could hear him. Those blood samples were routed through a federal diagnostic lab. The screening flagged a severe genetic anomaly. It triggered an automatic secondary review under federal medical guidelines. Greg swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "My blood work was fine," he stammered, taking a half-step backward. "I am in perfect health." "Your cardiovascular health is perfectly fine," Greg Kendrick corrected him, staring down at my ex-husband with eyes like chips of black ice. "But your reproductive system is fundamentally non-existent. The genetic sequencing confirmed the presence of a rare, irreversible chromosomal microdeletion. You suffer from complete azoospermia. You do not produce a single viable reproductive cell. You never have. You are 100% permanently sterile, Greg. You have been sterile since the day you were born." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. The passing nurses stopped walking. The patients in the waiting area stared in absolute stunned silence. I stood perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in front of my blazer, watching the exact moment Greg's entire fabricated reality was violently annihilated. For years he had tormented me. He had gaslighted me into believing my body was a defective failure. He had watched me cry over negative tests and quietly rejoiced in his own imagined superiority. But the medical truth was finally exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital. I was never the problem. Greg was the biological dead end. No, Greg whispered, shaking his head frantically. The denial was so deep it bordered on temporary insanity. No, that is a lie. That is a clinical impossibility. He pointed a trembling finger at the crying baby in Monica's arms. Look at him. He is my son. Monica and I conceived him naturally. She gave me the family Diana could not. You are making this up to ruin me. Kendrick did not say another word. He simply took a step back and let the real father take the floor. Cameron stepped forward, the sheer force of his rage seeming to suck the oxygen right out of the hallway. He did not look at Greg. He walked directly up to Monica, who was now openly weeping, clutching the crying baby against her chest, as if the child could shield her from the incoming destruction. Tell him, Monica. Cameron demanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl that promised absolute financial and social ruin. Tell your pathetic husband exactly whose DNA is running through that boy's veins. Monica sobbed violently, shaking her head side to side, unable to form a coherent sentence. Her carefully constructed gold digger facade had completely collapsed. Cameron turned his furious gaze onto Greg. You arrogant, stupid fool! Cameron spat the words, hitting Greg like physical blows. You spent the last 3 years kissing my boots trying to manage my crypto portfolios. You invited me to your country club dinners. You bragged about your beautiful new girlfriend. And while you were busy trying to play the big shot wealth manager, she was showing up at my penthouse. She knew I had a net worth 10 times larger than yours. She wanted a bigger payout. Greg's jaw dropped, his eyes darting frantically between Cameron and Monica. Monica. Greg gasped, his voice sounding small and broken. What is he talking about? Tell him he is lying. She slept with me for 6 months behind your back. Cameron continued, completely ignoring Greg's pathetic pleas. She got pregnant and realized she could play both sides of the board. She slapped your name on the birth certificate to secure that $2 million house in Bellevue and a diamond ring. Then she secretly came to me with a private paternity test, demanding $50,000 a month in untraceable crypto transfers to keep my name off the public record and avoid a scandal. She used you as the stable real estate ATM, and she used me as the genetic lottery ticket. The absolute silence in the hallway returned, broken only by Monica's loud, gasping sobs and the baby's continuous crying. Greg stood frozen. The human brain can only process a certain amount of catastrophic trauma before the logical circuits completely overload and primal animalistic rage takes over. Greg realized in one horrifying second that his entire life was a humiliating joke. His perfect son was a lie. His beautiful new wife was a manipulative extortionist who had slept with his wealthiest client. And he had just loudly broadcasted his own supposed superiority to his ex-wife, who was currently standing 10 feet away watching his destruction with a calm, satisfied smile. A guttural, agonizing scream ripped from Greg's throat. It was not a scream of sadness. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated violence. Greg lunged forward, his hands curling into tight fists, aiming directly for Cameron's face. He threw a wild, desperate punch fueled by the absolute destruction of his massive ego. But Cameron was not a soft corporate executive. He operated in the dark, volatile underground of cryptocurrency. Cameron easily dodged the clumsy swing, stepping inside Greg's reach and driving a brutal, swift punch straight into Greg's ribs. The impact drove the breath from Greg's lungs, but the manic adrenaline kept him moving. He tackled Cameron, slamming the wealthy broker against the hospital wall. A framed medical poster shattered behind them, sending shards of plastic and paper raining down onto the linoleum. Monica screamed in sheer terror, backing away and pressing herself against the reception desk to protect the baby. The brawl lasted exactly 4 seconds. 3 massive hospital security guards who had been hovering near the elevator since Kendrick's arrival sprinted down the corridor. They crashed into the 2 men with the force of a freight train. 2 guards grabbed Greg by his custom suit jacket, wrestling him violently to the ground. Greg kicked and thrashed, screaming obscenities at Monica, screaming at Cameron, screaming at the entire world. The third guard secured Cameron, pulling him back and ordering him to stand down. I stood precisely where I had been the entire time, my leather briefcase held securely at my side. I looked down at Greg. His expensive navy suit was torn, his tie was ripped, and his face was pressed hard against the formula-stained hospital floor by a 200-pound security guard. His perfect life had just been violently erased. And the most beautiful part of this entire spectacle was that my real revenge had not even started yet. The heavy silver doors of the second elevator bank slid open with a soft mechanical chime, completely oblivious to the violent chaos unfolding in the corridor. Stepping out into the fluorescent-lit hallway was Patricia. Greg's 60-year-old mother was dressed in a tailored cream Chanel suit, clutching a pristine designer handbag and a brightly wrapped gift box from an expensive infant boutique. She had arrived for what was supposed to be a routine post-birthday pediatric checkup for her beloved grandson. Instead, she walked straight into a war zone. Patricia froze her sensible designer pumps, halting abruptly on the polished linoleum. Her eyes darted across the wreckage. She saw the shattered plastic of the formula bottle. She saw Cameron straightening his custom silk tie while glaring at Monica. She saw her former best friend sobbing against the reception desk, clutching the wailing infant. And then she looked down at the floor. She saw her golden child, her perfect, successful, wealthy son, pinned to the ground by a massive security guard, his face pressed into a puddle of spilled milk. For 3 entire seconds, Patricia simply short-circuited. Her wealthy, elitist brain could not process the degrading spectacle. But then her gaze snapped upward and locked directly onto me. In Patricia's twisted, narcissistic reality, Greg was a flawless entity. He could do no wrong. Therefore, any misfortune that befell him had to be the result of a malicious external force, and I had always been her favorite scapegoat. Patricia dropped the expensive gift box. It hit the floor with a hollow thud. She let out a high-pitched theatrical shriek and lunged forward, marching straight past the security guards and pointing a manicured, trembling finger directly at my face. "What have you done, Diana?" Patricia screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the clinical walls. "Tell these thugs to take their hands off my son right now. You orchestrated this, did you not? You bitter, psychotic woman. You could not stand to see Greg happy, so you hired these people to attack him in a public hospital." I did not take a single step backward. I looked down at her finger hovering inches from my nose, and then looked directly into her frantic eyes. "I did not hire hospital security." "Patricia," I replied, my voice completely calm, an icy contrast to her manic hysteria. "Your son assaulted another man. They are simply restraining a violent aggressor." Patricia scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. She turned her venom toward Kendrick, who was still holding the federal medical documents. She looked at my brother-in-law with unfiltered elitist disdain, completely ignoring the silver federal badge clipped to his belt. "And you," Patricia spat, glaring at Kendrick. "I always knew Sylvia married a street thug. You bring fake forged documents into a hospital to terrorize my family. You think you can print out some medical jargon on a piece of paper and convince us that my son is defective. Greg is a prime physical specimen. He is an executive. He comes from a superior bloodline. Diana is the barren failure. She is the one whose body could not perform its basic biological duty. She paid you to forge this absolute garbage because she is drowning in jealousy." Kendrick did not react to her thinly veiled racism or her classist insults. He simply held up the hospital letterhead. "This is a federal diagnostic report," Patricia Kendrick stated, his deep baritone cutting through her shrieking. "Your son has complete azoospermia. He is permanently sterile. The child is not his. If you have an issue with the science, you can take it up with the Federal Medical Board. But screaming at me will not magically rewrite his DNA." "Lies!" Patricia roared, stomping her foot on the floor like a petulant toddler. It is all disgusting, vindictive lies fabricated by a discarded wife who has absolutely nothing to live for. Patricia spun around and rushed over to Monica. She wrapped her arms protectively around Monica's trembling shoulders, shielding both the sobbing woman and the crying baby from the rest of the hallway. Patricia glared at Cameron, who was watching her with an expression of profound disgust. "Do not listen to them, Monica." Patricia cooed, her voice instantly softening into a sickeningly sweet tone as she stroked the baby's head. "We know the truth. Look at this precious boy. He has Greg's strong jawline. He has his eyes. He is my grandson. Nobody is going to take him away from us. These people are just trying to extort us because Greg is so incredibly successful." Cameron let out a dark, terrifying laugh. His fury was momentarily eclipsed by the sheer absurdity of Patricia's delusion. "You are just as delusional as your pathetic son," Cameron sneered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the two women. "You want to talk about extortion, lady? Ask the woman you are hugging right now about the $50,000 in crypto she demanded from me last month to keep my name off the birth certificate. Ask her how many times she visited my penthouse while your son was at the office. That kid does not have a single drop of your precious bloodline. He is mine." Patricia clamped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. "I will not listen to this slander!" she shrieked, shaking her head violently. "You are a liar! You are all liars trying to steal our joy. Diana put you up to this because she wants half of everything Greg has built. She wants to ruin him because he traded up for a real woman." The security guard pinning Greg to the floor finally hauled him up to his feet, keeping a firm grip on his arms. Greg looked like a broken man, his pristine suit ruined, his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with a desperate pleading panic. "Mom," Greg gasped, his voice cracking. Tell them it is a lie." Patricia rushed to her son's side, ignoring the firm warning from the security guard to keep her distance. She grabbed Greg's face in her hands, planting a frantic kiss on his cheek. "Of course it is a lie, my sweet boy," Patricia cried, her hysteria reaching a fever pitch. "You are perfect. You have always been perfect. They are just trying to drag you down to their miserable level. Diana is a pathetic auditor who makes pennies compared to you. She is trying to weaponize this hospital to trigger a lawsuit because she is completely broke." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting smoothly by my sides. The pure, unadulterated madness radiating from Patricia was a masterclass in psychological projection. She was so desperate to protect the fragile illusion of her son's supremacy that she was actively rewriting reality in real time. She refused to accept the biological truth. She refused to accept the crypto broker's testimony. She was backing herself into a corner driven entirely by a toxic elitist pride that could not tolerate the concept of failure. Patricia turned back to me, her face flushed a deep, mottled red. "You think you have won, Diana?" She sneered, her upper lip curling into an ugly snarl. "You think this little circus performance is going to break my family? We are untouchable. Greg is a genius. You think you stripped him in the divorce, but you are nothing but a blind fool. You have absolutely no idea who you are messing with, or the kind of power my son truly holds." My eyes locked onto hers. The clinical machinery in my brain hummed to life, anticipating the exact moment her arrogant hysteria would override her basic survival instincts. I did not say a word. I just let her keep talking, waiting for her to dig the grave her son was about to fall into. Patricia stepped away from her son, the desperate need to assert her family's dominance, completely hijacking her rational thought process. She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin to look down at me, as if I were nothing more than dirt on the bottom of her expensive sensible pumps. The hospital's security guards were still holding Greg firmly by his arms, but Patricia acted as if he were standing on a triumphant pedestal. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to inflict maximum financial and emotional damage to prove that the Campbell bloodline was superior to my clinical auditing career. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sterile hospital air, and unleashed the exact words that would permanently destroy her son's life. "You think you are so brilliant, Diana? Patricia screamed, her voice echoing sharply down the corridor, reaching every single patient, nurse, and doctor within a 50-foot radius. You parade around with your little corporate title, checking your watch like you control the room. You think you cornered him in that mediation office a year ago. You actually believed he walked away with nothing but his base salary. You are a complete fool. My son is a financial genius. Greg's head snapped up, his eyes widening in sudden, stark terror. His breathing stopped completely. Mom. He choked out, his voice a strangled, panicked rasp. Mom, stop. Do not say another word. But Patricia could not hear him over the deafening roar of her own toxic pride. She was too focused on the twisted satisfaction of shoving my supposed failure directly into my face. He played you, Patricia bragged, waving her hands frantically in the air. He played your high-priced lawyers and that stupid family court judge for absolute fools. While you were busy crying over negative pregnancy tests, he was busy securing his real future. He pulled $8 million straight out of his executive portfolios and funneled it right into an untraceable Cayman Island shadow account right under your supposedly brilliant auditor nose. $8 million, Diana, clean liquid cash. He hid it perfectly during the divorce settlement to ensure his real family was provided for. You fought over the scraps of a joint checking account while he bought a $2 million mansion in Bellevue. You lost Diana. You lost everything. The silence that followed her declaration was absolute and terrifying. The crying baby seemed to pause to take a breath. The mechanical hum of the elevator stopped. The entire hallway felt like it had been suddenly plunged into a vacuum. Greg sagged against the grip of the security guards, all the remaining color draining rapidly from his face. He looked at his mother not with love or gratitude, but with the pure, unadulterated horror of a man who had just watched his executioner pull the lever. "Shut up," Greg whispered, a tear of sheer terror leaking from his eye. "Oh my God, Mom, shut your mouth, you just killed me." I stood perfectly still, my posture rigid and controlled. The information Patricia had just screamed at the top of her lungs hit my brain like a bolt of lightning, instantly illuminating the dark, complex financial web Greg had woven. My forensic auditor instincts shifted into maximum overdrive, rapidly processing the numbers, the timelines, and the corporate structure of his wealth management firm. $8 million. Greg was a senior vice president. He earned a base salary of $250,000 with performance bonuses that occasionally pushed his total compensation near $400,000. Even if he had saved every single penny of his bonuses for the entire 10 years we were married, he could not have mathematically accumulated $8 million in liquid cash to hide in a Cayman Island account. It was a statistical impossibility, unless the money did not belong to him. The pieces snapped together with lethal precision. Greg did not just hide marital assets during our divorce. He had used the chaos of our separation and the distraction of the asset division mediation to cover up a massive corporate crime. He had leveraged his executive access to embezzle client funds, washing the stolen capital through offshore accounts to bypass internal compliance audits. He had literally robbed the very clients he was supposed to be managing. And standing right next to him watching the entire spectacular collapse was his wealthiest client. Cameron slowly turned his head to look at Greg. The raw, violent fury from the paternity revelation was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, predatory stare. Cameron understood the dark web of high-tier finance better than anyone. He did not need a calculator to realize exactly what Patricia had just confessed. $8 million. Cameron repeated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent a visible shiver down Greg's spine. You hid $8 million in the Caymans right around the exact same time my private corporate trust reported a $3.5 million phantom deficit due to a supposed market fluctuation. A fluctuation you personally assured me was just a temporary algorithm error. Greg shook his head violently, tears of panic streaming down his face. "Cameron, please," Greg begged, struggling against the security guards. "She is confused. My mother is just talking crazy. There is no account. I did not touch your money. I swear on my life I did not touch it." "You do not have a life left to swear on, Greg." Cameron replied, his tone flat and utterly devoid of mercy. You stole from me to buy a house for the woman who was sleeping in my bed. You used my money to fund your pathetic illusion. Patricia finally realized the catastrophic error she had made. She looked at Greg's terrified face, then looked at Cameron's lethal expression, and finally turned to look at me. The arrogant, triumphant glow completely vanished from her features, replaced by a sickening pale dread. She clamped her manicured hand over her mouth, but it was entirely too late. The words were already out, and they could never be unsaid. I adjusted my grip on my leather briefcase. I looked directly at Patricia, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across my face. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice perfectly polite and incredibly sharp. "I spent 6 months trying to locate the missing capital from our divorce settlement. I always suspected he hid a few $100,000, but I never imagined he was stupid enough to embezzle $8 million of client funds. You just saved my forensic team hundreds of hours of discovery work." I turned my attention to my ex-husband, whose knees were visibly buckling under the weight of his impending destruction. Perjury in a family court regarding hidden marital assets carries a hefty fine and potential jail time, I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried to the hospital security guards acting as witnesses. But corporate embezzlement and wire fraud involving offshore Cayman accounts carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I looked back at Patricia, whose eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated horror. "You wanted to prove your son was a genius, Patricia," I added, my tone dripping with clinical disdain. "Congratulations, you just proved he is a federal criminal, and you provided the verbal confession in a public hallway filled with witnesses." Patricia let out a strangled, gasping sound, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. She staggered backward, leaning against the wall for support. Her golden child was not just sterile and cuckolded, he was a thief heading straight for a federal prison cell, and she was the one who had happily handed the government the key. Cameron did not wait for the hospital security to release their grip on Greg. He did not care about the federal embezzlement charges or the offshore accounts I was already planning to dismantle. Cameron operated in a world where money was simply a tool, but blood and loyalty were the ultimate currency. He slowly turned his attention away from the broken, weeping wealth manager on the floor and locked his dark, furious eyes onto the woman standing by the reception desk. Monica was trembling violently. The crying infant was clutched tightly against her chest, his small hands grasping at the fabric of her expensive designer blouse. She had played the ultimate high-stakes game of deception, believing her beauty and manipulation could easily control two wealthy men simultaneously. She had built her $2 million Bellevue illusion on a foundation of lies, and now the architect of her destruction was standing directly in front of her. Cameron closed the distance between them with slow, terrifying precision. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to scream to command absolute authority. His presence alone was enough to make Monica shrink backward until her spine hit the hard edge of the wooden desk. "You really thought you were the smartest person in the room," Monica Cameron stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried the weight of an execution order. "You thought you could sleep in my bed, demand crypto transfers to keep my name a secret, and then parade my son around town as a trophy for this pathetic, sterile thief." Monica sobbed, shaking her head frantically. "Cameron, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "I was protecting him. Greg is crazy. I needed the house for stability. I love you, Cameron. I always loved you. The baby needs his real father." The sheer audacity of her lie made Cameron let out a harsh, humorless laugh. His eyes narrowed into dark, cruel slits. "You do not love anyone but yourself, Monica. You are a parasite. You attached yourself to Greg for the real estate, and you attached yourself to me for the cash. But your little game is officially over." Cameron reached into his custom-tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, matte black smartphone. He tapped the screen twice and held it up so Monica could see the digital display. "As of 20 minutes ago, the 3 offshore crypto wallets I set up for your discrete monthly payments have been completely drained and permanently locked." Cameron announced, his tone perfectly flat and entirely devoid of mercy. "The platinum black cards you have been using to fund your luxury shopping sprees are deactivated. You currently have absolutely zero access to my capital." Monica gasped, her eyes widening in sheer panic. "You cannot do that!" She shrieked, her fake maternal persona completely vanishing as the reality of her financial ruin set in. "I have a child. You cannot cut me off. I will go to the press. I will tell everyone about the hush money." "Go ahead," Cameron challenged, tilting his head with a cold, predatory smile. "Call the press. Tell them you extorted a crypto broker while married to a man who embezzled $8 million of client funds. Let us see how much sympathy the public has for a gold-digging fraud." Cameron took one final step closer, pointing a sharp, authoritative finger directly at the crying infant. "And you are not going to use my son as a financial hostage ever again. My legal team filed an emergency ex parte custody petition at 9 o'clock this morning, the exact moment the DNA results were legally verified by the federal lab. You are an unemployed extortionist facing potential criminal conspiracy charges. I am a billionaire with a flawless legal record. A family court judge is going to grant me full physical and legal custody of that boy before the end of the week." "No!" Monica screamed, clutching the baby tighter, causing the child to wail even louder. "No, he is mine. You cannot take him from me. He is all I have left." "He is not a paycheck," Monica Cameron replied, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "He is my blood, and you are never going to use him to extort another dime from me. My lawyers will contact you regarding the immediate surrender of the child. Enjoy the Bellevue house while you can, because once the FBI seizes Greg's assets, you will be living on the street." Cameron turned his back on her, entirely dismissing her existence with absolute finality. He gave Kendrick a brief curt nod of mutual respect, adjusting his custom silk tie before walking back toward the elevator bank. He stepped inside, the silver doors sliding shut behind him, leaving the devastation of the hospital corridor entirely in his wake. Monica slid down the front of the reception desk, collapsing onto the linoleum floor. She buried her face in the baby's blanket, sobbing uncontrollably. Her entire world, her wealth, her status, her leverage had been completely vaporized in less than 5 minutes. Greg, who had been watching the entire exchange from the floor while still pinned by security, suddenly stopped struggling. The manic panic that had consumed him upon hearing the embezzlement confession shifted into something much darker. The absolute reality of his sterility, combined with the public humiliation of Monica's betrayal, triggered a violent psychological snap. His fragile, arrogant ego completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated, venomous rage. Greg hauled himself up to his knees, violently shoving one of the security guards away. The guard, surprised by the sudden burst of adrenaline, stumbled backward, allowing Greg just enough space to lunge toward the reception desk. "You filthy, lying whore!" Greg screamed. His face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He pointed a shaking, dirt-stained finger at Monica, who recoiled in terror. "You let me buy that house. You let me spend my money on his bastard kid. You sat in our living room and smiled while I bought you diamond rings. You used me." Monica looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. "You deserved it," she shrieked back, her own vicious nature finally exploding to the surface. "You are a broken, defective man, Greg. You could not even give me a real child. You spent your entire life pretending to be a big shot, but you are nothing but a sterile, pathetic thief. Cameron is 10 times the man you will ever be." Greg let out a horrifying, guttural roar. He threw himself forward, his hands reaching like claws toward Monica's throat. The remaining 2 security guards tackled him instantly, slamming him face first back onto the hard hospital floor. Greg thrashed violently, kicking his legs and screaming obscenities that echoed down the entire corridor. "I hate you!" Greg roared, tears of pure animalistic rage streaming down his face as he struggled against the heavy boots pinning him down. "I am going to ruin you, Monica. I am going to make sure you rot in the gutter. You are nothing without my money. You are nothing." Patricia stood frozen against the wall, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her own face as she watched her perfect golden family tear each other apart like rabid dogs. The illusion of the superior Campbell bloodline was completely incinerated, replaced by the ugly, vicious reality of their mutual greed and deception. I stood perfectly still, my hands neatly folded in front of my blazer, watching the two people who had gleefully destroyed my marriage absolutely annihilate each other. They were drowning in the exact toxic floodwaters they had created, and the most satisfying part of the entire spectacle was that I did not have to lift a single finger to push them under. The violent thrashing finally drained the last reserves of Greg's manic adrenaline. The three hospital security guards managed to drag him backward, forcing him into a kneeling position against the pale fluorescent-lit corridor wall. His custom-tailored navy suit jacket was torn at the shoulder seam, and the expensive Italian fabric was heavily stained with spilled baby formula and hospital floor wax. He was panting heavily, his chest heaving with exertion as he stared blankly at the absolute wreckage of his carefully constructed life. Across the hallway, Monica was still sobbing hysterically, curled into a pathetic ball at the base of the reception desk. She refused to look at him, clutching the crying infant tight against her chest, as the reality of her own financial ruin crushed her. Patricia remained frozen near the shattered medical poster, her hands covering her mouth in silent, horrified shock. The elitist matriarch, who had spent the last 10 minutes screaming about her superior bloodline, was now completely mute, watching her golden child face total annihilation. I watched the pathetic scene unfold for another 10 seconds, letting the image burn permanently into my memory. It was a masterpiece of self-destruction. They had walked into this hospital acting like apex predators, ready to mock and humiliate a barren ex-wife. Instead, they had walked blindly into a federal snare and actively pulled the trigger themselves. I adjusted my grip on Sylvia's medical discharge folder and my leather briefcase. My role in this public spectacle was officially concluded. I turned my head and gave Kendrick a brief, decisive nod. It was time to leave. I turned my back on the weeping remnants of the family that had abused me and took a deliberate step toward the silver elevator doors. The sharp, confident click of my heels against the linoleum seemed to snap Greg out of his traumatized daze. He suddenly realized that the woman he had spent years belittling, the woman he had specifically stopped to ambush just 20 minutes ago, was walking away with the absolute power to destroy his freedom. The blind rage he felt toward Monica evaporated instantly, completely replaced by a suffocating, terrifying panic for his own survival. "Diana, wait!" Greg gasped, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate wheeze. He shoved his shoulder forward, fighting against the exhaustion in his muscles. He managed to break his right arm free from the security guard's grip just long enough to lunge across the hallway toward me. His fingers clamped violently around my forearm, his grip tight and frantic. "Diana, please," Greg begged, looking up at me from his knees with wide, bloodshot eyes. "Please tell me this is a nightmare. Tell me this is just some twisted game you are playing to scare me. You are so smart, Diana. You can fix this. I am sorry, okay? I am so sorry I said those things to you today. You know I did not mean them. I was just angry. We were married for 10 years. You cannot just leave me here like this. Please help me." He was actually trying to leverage a decade of emotional abuse as a bargaining chip. He genuinely thought he could appeal to the loving, devoted wife I used to be. But that woman died the day I sat in a lawyer's office and watched him swear under oath that our joint savings were depleted, while he secretly funneled stolen client funds to buy a luxury mansion for my best friend. I did not flinch at his sudden physical contact. I did not try to forcefully yank my arm away or scream for the guards. I simply looked down at his trembling hand clutching my tailored charcoal blazer, and then I looked directly into his terrified, broken eyes. My resting heart rate remained perfectly steady. I reached over with my free hand and peeled his fingers off my sleeve one by one with surgical clinical precision. I stepped back, smoothing the wrinkled fabric of my jacket. "Our marriage ended the moment you decided my worth was entirely tied to my biology, Greg," I stated, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute finality. "I am not your wife anymore. I am a senior forensic corporate auditor, and you just stood in a public hallway filled with witnesses and proudly confessed to committing perjury during a federal divorce mediation." Greg shook his head violently, tears of pure terror spilling over his eyelashes and tracking through the dirt on his face. "I can give you half. he whispered frantically, completely ignoring the security guards who were moving to restrain his arm again. I will give you $4 million right now, Diana. Clean cash. Just do not call the federal authorities. Do not look into the Cayman routing numbers. Please just take the money and walk away. I smiled a cold, predatory smile that completely froze the remaining blood in his veins. I do not want your dirty money, Greg, I replied, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper that cut straight to his core. You committed perjury during our divorce. You hid $8 million of embezzled corporate funds. I am not just reopening the family court settlement to adjust the asset division. I am going to bankrupt you. My forensic team is going to rip apart every single corporate ledger, offshore trust, and shadow shell company attached to your name. By the time I am finished dismantling your fraudulent empire, you will not have enough liquid capital left to afford a public defender for your federal embezzlement trial. Patricia finally found her voice, letting out a horrified, high-pitched wail as the reality of my threat sank in. She lunged forward, trying to reach her son, but a passing nurse firmly intercepted her, urging her to step back against the wall. Kendrick stepped smoothly between me and Greg, his massive frame forming an impenetrable physical barrier. He looked down at my ex-husband with absolute, unfiltered disgust. If you ever attempt to grab my sister-in-law again, I will personally ensure a federal assault charge is added to your rapidly expanding indictment. Kendrick promised, his deep baritone vibrating with lethal authority. Kendrick placed a protective hand lightly on my upper back, guiding me away from the chaos. We walked toward the elevator bank without looking back. I reached out and pressed the call button. The bright digital chime echoed one last time through the devastated corridor. As the heavy silver doors slid open, I stepped inside, turning around to face the hallway. Greg was sobbing openly on his knees, begging the security guards to let him go so he could talk to me. Monica was still curled in a pathetic ball against the reception desk, her fake glamorous life completely erased. Patricia was weeping hysterically, her elite aristocratic facade entirely incinerated by the humiliating spectacle of her son's destruction. I did not offer them a single ounce of pity. I stood tall, my posture absolute iron. The silver elevator doors slid smoothly shut, sealing them in their own self-made hell, and taking me one step closer to the ultimate financial execution. The drive from Seattle General Hospital back to my high-security downtown penthouse was completely silent. Kendrick drove his heavy federal SUV with the same focused intensity he applied to his courtroom prosecutions. Sitting in the back seat, my younger sister Sylvia was heavily medicated from her appendectomy, but she was wide awake. I had briefed her on the absolute nuclear detonation that had just occurred in the hospital corridor. Sylvia just leaned her head against the tinted window and smiled. She had always hated Greg. She had always seen right through his arrogant corporate facade, and today she finally got to watch it crumble. Kendrick parked the SUV in my private underground garage. We carefully guided Sylvia up the private elevator and got her settled into the plush bedding of my guest suite. Once she was comfortable with a cup of hot tea and her pain medication, Kendrick and I walked directly down the hall. We pushed open the heavy frosted glass doors and stepped into my domain. My home office was not a standard remote workspace. It was a digital war room. As a senior forensic corporate auditor handling multi-million-dollar discrepancy cases, I required absolute technological superiority. My custom-built desk spanned the entire length of the back wall, supporting an array of 6 high-definition monitors connected to an encrypted proprietary server rack humming quietly in the corner. I did not rely on standard search engines. I utilized advanced data scraping software, secure public records databases, and predictive financial algorithms designed to hunt down missing capital across the globe. I took off my charcoal blazer, draping it over the back of my ergonomic leather chair, and rolled up the sleeves of my white silk blouse. Kendrick pulled up a secondary chair sitting beside me as the 6 monitors flared to life, bathing the dark room in a sharp blue glow. We have a verbal confession to perjury and an $8 million starting point, I stated, my fingers hovering over the mechanical keyboard. Patricia screamed that he used Cayman Island accounts, but Greg is not smart enough to execute a direct international wire transfer from his wealth management firm without triggering an internal compliance audit. He had to wash the money domestically first before moving it offshore. Kendrick leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He is a senior vice president managing high-tier portfolios. Kendrick noted his dark eyes tracking the lines of code scrolling across my primary monitor. He has the administrative clearance to authorize large capital movements for his clients under the guise of alternative investments. Cameron mentioned a $3.5 million phantom deficit that Greg blamed on a market fluctuation. Greg was bleeding his clients dry, but he still needed a clean local vehicle to launder the embezzled cash before routing it to the Caymans. "I need a domestic cleaning service," I murmured, my eyes darting between the screens as I initiated a deep dive into the Washington State Department of Licensing database. I need a localized asset class that handles massive cash transactions with minimal federal oversight. I typed in the first and last name of the woman who had just had her entire life destroyed in the hospital lobby. The database churned for 3 seconds before Monica's official real estate license profile popped up on the screen. "Let us look at my former best friend," I said, tapping the screen. Monica got her luxury real estate license exactly 18 months ago, right around the time my marriage started mysteriously falling apart. Before that, she was working as a mid-level marketing coordinator making $60,000 a year. Suddenly, she is driving a European sports car and selling multi-million-dollar estates. I launched a secondary forensic program linking Monica's real estate license number directly to the King County property tax records. I commanded the software to pull every single commercial and residential property transaction where Monica was listed as the primary buying or selling agent over the last 2 years. The results populated instantly, filling 3 of my monitors with dozens of property deeds, LLC registration documents, and escrow transfer receipts. The sheer volume of transactions was staggering for a rookie real estate agent. But as my trained eyes scanned the data, the underlying pattern immediately materialized. "Look at the buyer and seller names on these specific commercial deeds," I instructed, pointing a pen at the center screen. Monica was not representing real families or legitimate commercial developers. She was representing anonymous limited liability companies. Kendrick leaned closer, reading the dense legal text. Apex Holdings, LLC, Pinnacle Northwest Properties, LLC, Emerald Horizon Assets, LLC. Kendrick read the names aloud, his tone shifting into the cold clinical register of a federal prosecutor. They are all registered to the same obscure registered agent address in Delaware. It is a massive network of shell companies. I pulled up the escrow transfer logs, cross-referencing the dates of Monica's phantom property sales with the timeline of Greg's divorce disclosures. The financial puzzle pieces snapped together with lethal perfection, forming a picture of absolute staggering criminal conspiracy. "This is how they did it," I explained, the adrenaline of the hunt sharpening my focus. Greg embezzled the funds from his wealthy clients like Cameron, disguising the theft as high-yield alternative real estate investments. He wired the stolen corporate capital directly into an escrow account controlled by Monica's real estate brokerage. I clicked on a specific transaction, highlighting the flow of the money in bright red on the screen. Monica then used her license to execute fake property sales between the different shell companies. I continued mapping out the money laundering cycle. She artificially inflated the property values, selling a vacant commercial lot back and forth between Apex Holdings and Pinnacle Northwest. Every time the property changed hands, the embezzled money was legally washed through the escrow account, emerging as clean, legitimate real estate capital gains. Kendrick crossed his arms, the full scope of the federal crime settling heavily into the room. And once the money was officially washed through the fraudulent Washington real estate market, Monica wired the clean cash directly to the Cayman Island routing numbers Patricia bragged about. "Exactly," I confirmed, hitting the print command and sending the mountain of digital evidence to my secure laser printer. They were running a highly sophisticated localized money laundering syndicate. Greg provided the stolen corporate capital from his clients, and Monica provided the legitimate real estate vehicle to wash it clean. It was a perfect parasitic ecosystem. They thought they were completely untouchable, Kendrick let out a low whistle of genuine professional appreciation. You realize what you just uncovered, Diana. This is not just a family court asset dispute anymore. By utilizing a federally insured wealth management firm to wire stolen funds across state lines to Delaware shell companies before moving it internationally, they just triggered the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. I reached over to the printer, gathering the thick stack of warm paper, the undeniable, irrefutable proof of their destruction resting heavily in my hands. "I know, Kendrick," I replied, a cold, satisfied smile touching the corners of my mouth. "I promised Greg I was going to bankrupt him, but the federal government is going to make sure he never sees the outside of a prison cell for the rest of his natural life. Now we just need to wait for him to panic, because a cornered, desperate man is about to make the biggest digital mistake of his entire criminal career." I set the stack of warm printed documents down onto the sleek glass surface of my custom desk. Kendrick leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms as we stared at the glowing monitors. The financial trap was fully constructed. We had the routing numbers, the shell company records, and the federal medical subpoena. Now we simply needed Greg to execute the final fatal maneuver of his own free will. We did not have to wait long. Less than 2 hours after we left the hospital corridor, my primary banking monitor flared to life. A bright crimson notification banner flashed rapidly across the top of the digital display, accompanied by a sharp mechanical warning chime from my secure server rack. Right on schedule, I announced, my eyes locking onto the flashing red text. "He is making his move." Kendrick leaned forward, resting his hands on the edge of the glass desk. "What exactly are we looking at, Diana?" he asked, his voice dropping to a serious professional register. "During our marriage, Greg established a dual authorization protocol through his wealth management firm to oversee our joint accounts," I explained, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard to trace the incoming digital request. "When we finalized the divorce settlement, he swore under penalty of perjury that he had completely severed all digital access to my personal banking. But Greg is a control freak. He secretly kept a shadow backdoor access token active on his corporate server just in case he ever felt the need to exert financial dominance over me again. As a forensic auditor, I spotted the dormant token 6 months ago. I did not delete it. I left it active specifically as bait for a moment exactly like this." I pointed to the crimson banner tracking the origin of the digital command. "He is currently attempting to trigger a localized asset freeze on my primary checking and savings accounts. He is trying to completely lock down my liquid capital. He wants to drain my resources so I cannot afford to hire a massive legal team to go after his Cayman offshore accounts." Kendrick let out a low, dark chuckle. "He is trying to financially starve a senior corporate auditor," Kendrick noted, shaking his head at the sheer, unmitigated arrogance. "He really is the stupidest man alive." Before the digital freeze could even fully process, the sleek black smartphone resting on my desk began to vibrate. The caller identification screen lit up, displaying Greg's private cellular number. The cornered animal was finally striking out. I routed the incoming call directly through my encrypted desktop server. I reached out and pressed the prominent green digital record button on my audio software, ensuring every single syllable would be captured, stored, and verified for federal prosecution. Then I hit the speaker button, allowing Greg's frantic voice to fill the quiet war room. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Diana?" Greg spat the moment the line connected. His voice was completely unhinged, vibrating with a mixture of sheer panic and desperate forced aggression. "You think you can just walk away from me in a hospital hallway and threaten to bankrupt my life? You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with." I remained perfectly silent. In any interrogation or extortion attempt, silence is the absolute most effective weapon. It forces the panicked aggressor to fill the void with their own incriminating words. "Did you really think I would not take precautions?" Greg demanded, his breathing heavy and erratic, echoing through the desktop speakers. "I manage multi-million-dollar portfolios for a living. I know how to cripple an opponent. Try logging into your bank accounts right now, Diana. Go ahead and try. You are completely locked out. I just froze your entire financial existence. Your checking, your savings, your emergency funds, they are all entirely inaccessible. You cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone hire a team of federal lawyers to come after my offshore trusts." I glanced at Kendrick, who was smiling a cold, predatory smile. I leaned closer to the desktop microphone, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. You do not have the legal authorization to freeze my personal assets, Greg, I stated calmly, expertly, prompting him to dig his grave even deeper. We are divorced. That is a direct violation of federal banking regulations. I do not care about banking regulations! Greg roared, his massive, fragile ego completely overriding his basic survival instincts. I have executive clearance at my firm. I can freeze whatever I want and bury the paperwork so deep your little forensic software will never find it. You pushed me too far today, Diana. You humiliated me in front of my mother. You let Cameron threaten me. Now you are going to pay the price. And what exactly is the price, Greg? I asked, my tone flat and analytical. You are going to sign a non-disclosure agreement, Greg commanded, his voice dripping with venomous arrogance. I already have my corporate attorneys drafting the contract. It states that you completely renounce any claim to the $8 million in the Cayman accounts. It states that you will never speak to the federal authorities, the IRS, or the SEC regarding my business practices or Monica's real estate transactions. You are going to sign it, and you are going to get it notarized by tomorrow morning. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the glass desk, staring at the audio waveform recording his voice. And if I refuse to sign this non-disclosure agreement, I asked smoothly. If you refuse, I will permanently lock your accounts. Greg threatened, delivering the exact fatal phrasing I needed. I will drain your credit lines. I will leverage my firm to blackball your auditing career across the entire West Coast. You will not be able to pay your penthouse lease. I will leave you completely broke and homeless on the streets of Seattle. You sign the document and keep your mouth shut about the embezzlement, or I destroy your entire life. Do we understand each other, Diana? The federal extortion requirement was officially met. He had explicitly demanded a legal concession under the direct threat of financial ruin and career sabotage. We understand each other perfectly, Greg, I replied, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register. I have everything I need. Before he could utter another pathetic threat, I reached out and abruptly severed the connection. The war room fell into a heavy, absolute silence. I clicked the mouse, saving the encrypted audio file to 3 separate, secure cloud locations. Kendrick stood up from his leather chair, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. A verbal confession to perjury in a hospital and a recorded federal extortion attempt over the phone. Kendrick summarized, his dark eyes gleaming with absolute lethal professional satisfaction. You just handed me a flawless, unassailable federal indictment on a silver platter, Diana. I am not finished yet, I replied, turning my attention back to the primary banking monitor. Extortion is just the appetizer, Kendrick. I want the entire corporate empire. And he is about to hand us the keys to his firm's mainframe. The flashing crimson banner indicating the asset freeze was still pulsing rapidly across the top of my digital display. The progress bar beneath the warning text was inching steadily toward 100%. Kendrick leaned over my shoulder, his dark brow furrowing as he watched the unauthorized command execute on my screen. Why are you not running a counter protocol? Kendrick asked, his voice laced with genuine professional confusion. You have the administrative security clearance to block this request instantly. You can lock him out of your personal accounts with a single keystroke. Why are you letting him freeze your liquid capital? I am letting him freeze my accounts because I want him to leave a permanent digital footprint, I explained, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard to launch a secondary background tracing program. If I block the request right now, he simply gets a standard error message and logs off. But if I allow the freeze command to fully process through the financial clearinghouse, his computer is forced to execute a complex digital handshake with a federally insured banking server. I pointed to a scrolling window of raw green code on my left monitor. Greg is currently sitting in his corner office at his wealth management firm. I continued, my eyes tracking the incoming data packets. He is not using a burner phone or a personal laptop from a coffee shop. He is entirely too arrogant to believe anyone could ever track him. He is executing this unauthorized asset freeze directly through his secure corporate mainframe. When that progress bar hits 100%, his firm's highly encrypted network will be forced to ping my bank's federal server to verify the command. Kendrick crossed his arms, a look of profound realization washing over his face. You are using your own bank account as a digital honeypot. Kendrick noted his tone dropping to a low register of professional awe. You are baiting him into logging his exact corporate internet protocol address into a permanent federal ledger. Exactly, I confirmed. The progress bar on the center monitor suddenly flashed a bright solid red. The text on the screen shifted from pending to locked. My primary checking and savings accounts were officially frozen. I had absolute zero access to my own money. Greg thought he had just won the war. He thought he had successfully crippled my ability to fight back. Instead, he had just stepped blindly into an inescapable digital snare. I immediately executed the tracing protocol I had running in the background. The 6 monitors in my war room synced together, churning rapidly through the encrypted data packets that had just hit my bank's server. I bypassed the standard security firewalls and isolated the exact point of origin for the malicious freeze command. A 12-digit string of numbers materialized in bold white text against the black background of my primary screen. There it is. I announced, a cold surge of victory coursing through my veins. That is the static corporate IP address, assigned directly to Greg's executive terminal at his wealth management firm. He just hardwired his physical office location to a federal cybercrime. But capturing his IP address was only the first half of my strategy. Now I needed to completely weaponize it. I opened a new command terminal and imported the mountain of data we had previously gathered regarding Monica's fraudulent real estate syndicate. I pulled up the registration documents for Apex Holdings' Pinnacle Northwest Properties and the rest of the Delaware shell companies. Then I accessed the digital login logs for the Cayman Island offshore routing accounts Patricia had so helpfully screamed about in the hospital corridor. I initiated a rapid cross-referencing algorithm, commanding my proprietary software to compare Greg's newly captured corporate IP address against the login histories of the illegal shell companies. The secure server rack in the corner of my office hummed loudly as the processors handled the massive data load. If Greg was running an $8 million embezzlement scheme, he had to manage the stolen funds somehow. I explained to Kendrick while the system worked. He had to log into the Delaware LLC portals to authorize the fake property purchases. He had to log into the Cayman Island accounts to verify the international wire transfers. And because he is an arrogant control freak who spends 80 hours a week trying to impress his boss, I guarantee he managed his entire criminal empire straight from his executive desk. The monitors chimed simultaneously. The algorithm had finished its scan. The results populated across the screens in a cascading wave of undeniable, irrefutable proof. Every single illegal transaction Monica had executed through her real estate license was mirrored by a corresponding digital authorization ping. And every single one of those authorization pings originated from the exact same 12-digit static IP address. Kendrick placed his hands flat on the smooth glass surface of my desk, leaning in to stare at the data. His breathing was slow and measured, completely absorbed by the sheer magnitude of the evidence I had just compiled. He did not just use his firm's network to extort you, Kendrick stated, his deep baritone voice echoing in the quiet room. He used the firm's secure corporate mainframe to actively manage a federal money laundering syndicate. He routed $8 million of stolen client funds through the exact same server his CEO uses to manage legitimate institutional wealth. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, crossing my arms. He completely compromised a multi-billion-dollar financial institution. I replied, my tone clinical and absolute. He turned a legitimate wealth management firm into a digital hub for international money laundering. When the Securities and Exchange Commission sees this server log, they are not just going to arrest Greg. They are going to raid the entire building. They are going to seize the firm's hard drives and audit every single executive portfolio. Greg thought he was a financial genius. He thought hiding money in the Caymans made him an untouchable ghost. He genuinely believed that freezing my checking account would leave me broken and defenseless. But my forensic trap had just snapped completely shut. I had successfully linked his blatant extortion attempt directly to his massive corporate embezzlement operation, leaving a digital paper trail so thick and heavily encrypted that not even a team of elite defense attorneys could ever erase it. I looked up at my brother-in-law. The federal indictment was complete. The digital evidence was secured. The trap was locked. Now it was time to execute the absolute public destruction of the man who had tried to discard me. The cool blue light of the 6 monitors bathed the war room in a sharp digital glow. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair watching the final data packets compile into a flawlessly encrypted federal dossier. We had just achieved total victory. But the technological reality of a multi-billion-dollar wealth management firm is that their internal security grids are not designed to be passive. They employ massive automated compliance algorithms to monitor every single keystroke executed by their executives. And Greg had just made a catastrophic error. I pointed to the secondary monitor on my right. A new stream of data began cascading down the screen, indicating a sudden aggressive digital firewall bounce. When my proprietary software traced Greg's IP address, it did not just passively record the 12-digit number. My system executed a reverse digital handshake, bouncing a verification signal directly back to the source to confirm the static corporate address. Kendrick leaned closer, narrowing his eyes at the rapidly shifting code. "What is happening now, Diana?" he asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "His firm has an internal cybersecurity protocol," I explained, keeping my eyes locked on the screen. When my server bounced the verification signal back to his computer, his executive dashboard undoubtedly flagged the external trace. The firm's IT department just received an automated alert stating that a senior vice president bypassed standard compliance channels to execute a hostile freeze on an unaffiliated civilian bank account. And worse, he now knows that I just successfully traced his exact location. As if on cue, my secure desktop system registered an immediate frantic termination of his network connection. Greg had panicked and pulled the digital plug, but it was entirely too late. The digital fingerprint was already secured in my encrypted cloud vault. The silence in the war room was deafening. It lasted for exactly 2 minutes. Then the sleek black smartphone resting on the glass surface of my desk began to vibrate violently once again. The caller identification screen lit up, flashing his private cellular number. Kendrick let out a low, sharp laugh, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "The sheer, unmitigated audacity of this man," Kendrick murmured. "He just realized he handed you the exact weapon you need to destroy him, and now he is calling back to beg for his life." I reached forward and pressed the green digital record button on my audio software for the second time today. I routed the call through the desktop speakers, ensuring the audio capture was crystal clear. Then I answered the call, remaining perfectly silent. "Diana," Greg gasped, his voice completely unrecognizable. The venomous, arrogant tyrant who had threatened to leave me homeless on the streets of Seattle just 10 minutes ago was entirely gone. His tone was frantic, high-pitched, and breathless. He sounded like a man who was physically suffocating. "Diana, are you there? Please tell me you are there." I allowed the heavy silence to stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, forcing him to stew in his own absolute terror. "Yes, Greg," I replied, my voice perfectly flat and clinical. "I am here." "What did you just do?" Greg demanded, his words tumbling over each other in a chaotic rush. My terminal just threw a massive red security warning. My dashboard said an external trace was successfully executed against my IP address. "You traced me. You pinged my corporate network. Diana, you have to delete that log right now. You cannot have that IP address on your server." "And why is that, Greg?" I asked innocently, leaning closer to the microphone. "Is there something illegal attached to that specific corporate network location?" He let out a pathetic whimpering sound. He knew I had already connected the dots. He knew I had the Cayman Island routing numbers and the Delaware Shell Company ledgers. He understood that with his IP address, I possessed the final irrefutable link, proving he ran the entire money laundering syndicate straight from his wealth management desk. "Diana, please," Greg begged, his voice cracking into a full-blown sob. "You do not understand what will happen to me. If the compliance department audits that specific terminal, they will see everything. The Securities and Exchange Commission will get involved. I will go to federal prison. They will lock me away forever. I know, Greg. I stated my tone devoid of a single ounce of mercy. Embezzlement and wire fraud carry severe mandatory minimum sentences. You should have thought about that before you stole $8 million from your clients to buy Monica a $2 million house. I will pay you! Greg blurted out, abandoning any remaining shred of his corporate dignity. His sheer desperation pushed him into committing yet another massive federal felony right over an open recorded line. I will pay you to delete the trace. I will give you $50,000 right now. Clean cash wired straight to a secure account of your choosing. Just wipe the server, Diana, please. I looked at Kendrick, who raised his eyebrows in absolute professional shock. A federal medical fraud investigator was standing in my office listening to a wealth manager actively attempt to bribe a witness. $50,000, I repeated, my voice dripping with cold, analytical disdain. You think your freedom is only worth $50,000? No, wait. Greg stammered, his panic escalating to a fever pitch. 100,000. I can liquidate a discrete fund right now. I can give you $500,000, Diana. $500,000 in clean, untraceable cash. I will sign whatever you want. I will give you the Bellevue house. I will leave Monica. Just name your price. Please do not hand that digital log over to the federal authorities. I am begging you on my knees, Diana. Have mercy on me. He was openly weeping now. The great untouchable financial genius was sobbing through the desktop speakers, offering me $500,000 to save his pathetic, miserable life. He had spent a decade making me feel utterly worthless, and now he was groveling, offering me a fortune just to pretend I saw nothing. I stared at the audio waveform dancing across my monitor, perfectly capturing his federal bribery attempt. I had the perjury confession. I had the extortion threat. I had the IP address linking him to the embezzlement. And now I had an explicitly recorded $500,000 bribe. The arsenal was fully stocked. I leaned into the microphone, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across my face. I will see you at the charity gala tomorrow, Greg. I stated, my voice carrying the absolute chilling weight of an execution order. Diana, no, please! Greg screamed, his voice tearing with raw terror. I reached out and severed the connection, cutting off his desperate wails. The war room plunged back into a calm, quiet silence. I saved the audio file, encrypting it alongside the rest of the federal dossier. The trap was completely full. Tomorrow night, Greg's firm was hosting their annual Elite High Society Charity Gala in downtown Seattle. He would be surrounded by his wealthy clients, his corporate peers, and his oblivious CEO. And I was going to walk right through those double doors and burn his entire world to the ground. The following evening, the Grand Symphony Ballroom in downtown Seattle was transformed into a fortress of absolute high society opulence. Greg's wealth management firm spared no expense for their annual charity gala. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the imported marble floors. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne and delicate caviar hors d'oeuvres. This was the pinnacle event of the corporate calendar, designed specifically to showcase the firm's elite success and stroke the massive egos of their wealthiest clients. Greg and Monica arrived in a leased black limousine, attempting to project an illusion of total invincibility. Despite the apocalyptic destruction of their personal lives just 24 hours prior, they were desperately faking a united front for the flashing cameras of the local society photographers. Monica wore a tight silver designer gown she had purchased before Cameron permanently froze her black cards. She clung tightly to Greg's arm, flashing a brilliant practice smile that completely failed to reach her terrified, hollow eyes. Her gold digger facade was cracking under the immense pressure of impending poverty. Greg looked entirely worse. He was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo, but the sharp fabric could not hide the physical toll of his absolute panic. He was sweating profusely. His eyes darted frantically around the ballroom, scanning the shadows. He had spent the entire night staring at his ceiling, waiting for federal agents to kick his front door down. When the morning passed without an arrest, he foolishly convinced himself that I was bluffing. He told himself I was just a bitter ex-wife who did not have the actual courage to take down a multi-billion-dollar financial institution. He thought if he could just make it through this gala and shake the CEO's hand, he could somehow salvage his crumbling empire. He was wrong. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy mahogany double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom swung open. The low hum of wealthy corporate chatter suddenly faltered, rippling into a hushed, stunned silence as heads began to turn toward the foyer. I walked into the ballroom, projecting the kind of untouchable, lethal confidence that cannot be bought or faked. I wore a breathtaking razor-sharp emerald silk gown that cascaded perfectly down to the marble floor. The deep jewel tone contrasted flawlessly with the cold, clinical precision of my posture. I did not wear excessive diamonds or try to compete with the gaudy displays of wealth surrounding me. I carried a simple black leather clutch that perfectly concealed my secure digital tablet. I moved through the parted crowd with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator stepping into an enclosure full of trapped prey. Greg spotted me from across the room near the ice sculpture display. The champagne flute in his hand tipped violently, splashing expensive alcohol onto the sleeve of his tuxedo. All the remaining color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. Monica let out a sharp, audible gasp, shrinking behind his shoulder as if my emerald gown were emitting physical radiation. The sheer, arrogant panic took over Greg's brain. He could not allow me to ruin his image in front of his peers. He abandoned Monica and stormed aggressively across the ballroom floor, marching directly toward my path. Two large private security guards wearing dark earpieces instinctively flanked him, assuming I was an unauthorized threat. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Diana." Greg hissed, his voice, a frantic, venomous whisper, designed to avoid echoing across the silent room. "Are you insane? This is a private corporate event. You are not on the guest list. You do not belong in this building." I stopped walking. I looked him up and down, taking in the pathetic sweat forming on his brow. "I belong exactly where I choose to be, Greg." I replied, my voice perfectly smooth and carrying just enough volume for the surrounding executives to hear. Greg's face flushed a deep, mottled red, his fragile ego completely shattered under the weight of his fear. He turned to the two massive security guards, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "Remove this woman immediately!" Greg commanded, his voice pitching upward into an embarrassing, desperate shout. "She is my ex-wife. She is completely unhinged, and she is trespassing on private corporate property. Grab her and throw her out the back service doors right now." The two security guards stepped forward, reaching their large hands out to grab my arms. I did not flinch. I did not step backward. I kept my eyes locked on Greg, waiting for the exact moment his perceived authority evaporated. Before the guards could even brush the silk fabric of my gown, a booming, authoritative voice echoed sharply across the quiet ballroom. "Stand down immediately. Do not touch her." The crowd parted seamlessly like the Red Sea, allowing the chief executive officer of the wealth management firm to step to the forefront. Mr. Carmichael was a distinguished, silver-haired man who commanded absolute respect in the financial sector. He possessed a reputation for ruthless efficiency and zero tolerance for corporate liability. He walked directly up to the security guards, waving them off with a sharp flick of his wrist. The guards instantly stepped back, lowering their hands and returning to their posts. Greg stared at his boss, his jaw dropping in complete shock. "Mr. Carmichael," Greg stammered, attempting to quickly smooth the lapels of his ruined tuxedo. "Sir, I apologize for this disruption. This is my ex-wife Diana. She is highly unstable and she crashed the gala to cause a scene. I was just having security escort her off the premises to protect the integrity of the event." Mr. Carmichael did not look at Greg. He turned his attention directly to me, offering a brief, respectful nod that completely validated my presence in the room. "She is not crashing the gala." Greg, Mr. Carmichael stated, his voice echoing with cold corporate authority. "And she is certainly not trespassing. Diana is here tonight as my personal VIP guest." Greg blinked, his mind completely failing to process the reality unfolding in front of him. Your guest. Greg repeated, his voice sounding small and weak. But why? She does not work for the firm. That changed at 6 o'clock this morning, Mr. Carmichael replied, turning his sharp, icy gaze onto Greg. Our internal cybersecurity grid flagged a massive unauthorized breach originating from your specific executive terminal yesterday afternoon. The compliance department notified me that you bypassed our secure firewalls to execute a hostile financial command against a civilian bank account. That is a catastrophic violation of our federal charter. Greg's knees visibly buckled. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of wealthy clients and corporate peers who were actively hanging on every single word. I cannot allow a breach of that magnitude to be investigated internally. Mr. Carmichael continued, his tone completely devoid of mercy. I required an independent forensic audit to determine exactly how badly you compromised our network. So I hired the absolute best in the business. Diana is not just your ex-wife, Greg. She is the newly appointed lead independent auditor for this entire financial institution, and she has my full executive authorization to tear your entire department apart. Greg stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, completely isolated under the glaring crystal chandeliers. He had tried to lock me out of my own life. Instead, he had just handed me the keys to his entire corporate kingdom. I smiled, a cold, perfectly tailored smile, gripping my black leather clutch. The social execution was flawless, but the true financial slaughter was just getting started. Mr. Carmichael turned away from the trembling wealth manager and gestured toward the VIP elevator bank, indicating we would begin the formal corporate review shortly. I offered a polite nod of agreement to the chief executive officer, acknowledging his command. Before I proceeded to the glass boardroom on the upper level, I needed a brief moment of quiet to connect my encrypted digital tablet to the firm's internal mainframe and organize the federal dossier. I excused myself, stepping away from the stunned crowd, and walked smoothly across the polished marble floor toward the luxurious women's powder room located just off the main foyer. The powder room was a sprawling sanctuary of rose gold mirrors, velvet lounge chairs, and soft ambient lighting designed specifically for the elite wives of the firm's highest earners. Several spouses of the top executives were standing by the long vanity sinks, adjusting their diamond necklaces and reapplying expensive lipstick. They were buzzing with hushed, frantic gossip about the dramatic public confrontation that had just occurred on the ballroom floor. When I walked through the heavy wooden door, the chatter instantly died. They parted respectfully, stepping away from the sinks and allowing me direct access. They recognized the unprecedented authority Mr. Carmichael had just bestowed upon me, and nobody wanted to accidentally insult the woman who now held the keys to their husbands' careers. I set my black leather clutch on the pristine marble counter and retrieved my secure digital tablet. Just as the encrypted screen flared to life, the heavy door to the powder room swung open with excessive aggressive force. Monica stumbled inside. The silver designer gown that had looked so glamorous an hour ago was now visibly askew, the delicate straps slipping down her shoulder. Her face was flushed a deep mottled red, and she was clutching a half-empty crystal flute of vintage champagne. She had clearly been drinking heavily, attempting to numb the crushing reality of her collapsing financial stability. Seeing me standing there completely calm and preparing my corporate audit triggered the last pathetic remnants of her venomous pride. She desperately needed to prove to the wealthy wives in the room that she was still the superior alpha female. Monica slammed her champagne flute down onto the marble counter, causing the delicate crystal to ring sharply against the stone. The other women in the room stiffened, turning their heads to watch the impending disaster unfold. Monica marched up to me, her breath reeking of expensive alcohol and sheer desperation. "You think you are so clever, Diana," Monica hissed, her voice vibrating with toxic malice as she pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "You think putting on a fancy emerald dress and manipulating Mr. Carmichael makes you powerful? These women know exactly who you are and what you are trying to do. Monica turned to face the row of executive wives gesturing wildly toward me in a frantic attempt to rally the wealthy socialites to her defense. "She is nothing but a jealous, bitter ex-wife," Monica announced, her voice pitching upward hysterically. "She is completely barren. She could not keep her own husband satisfied, so he finally left her and chose me. He bought me a $2 million estate in Bellevue. We have a beautiful, perfect son together. And now she is so consumed by pure psychotic jealousy that she is trying to destroy his career with fake audits. You all need to watch your husbands closely, because this woman is a completely unhinged stalker trying to ruin our family." The executive wives exchanged highly uncomfortable glances, shifting nervously on their designer heels. They did not rally behind Monica. They did not offer her sympathetic nods. They simply watched me, waiting to see exactly how the firm's new lead independent auditor would handle the drunken, aggressive outburst. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in a petty screaming match or hurl a shallow insult back at her. I smoothly locked the screen of my digital tablet and turned to face the woman who used to be my closest friend. "You are drinking vintage champagne on an empty stomach, Monica." I observed, my tone perfectly flat and clinical, cutting through her manic energy like a scalpel. "It is a very poor coping mechanism for a woman who is about to lose absolutely everything." Monica scoffed, rolling her eyes in an exaggerated display of arrogance. "I am not losing anything," she spat, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "Greg is a senior vice president. He brings in millions for this firm. He will squash your pathetic little audit by tomorrow morning, and Mr. Carmichael will throw you back out onto the street." I tilted my head, looking at her with a mixture of clinical curiosity and absolute disdain. "Greg cannot squash a federal indictment." I corrected her, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet powder room, ensuring every single woman heard the specific terminology. "And frankly, Greg's impending federal prison sentence is the absolute least of your concerns right now. Let us talk about your immediate future. How exactly did your conversation with Cameron end yesterday morning at the hospital? Did you manage to convince the billionaire to unfreeze those offshore crypto wallets he was using to pay you off?" Monica's face instantly drained of all color. The arrogant, drunken sneer melted away, completely replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The wealthy wives in the room gasped softly, the sudden mention of Cameron's name instantly clicking into place within their elite high society gossip network. They knew exactly who the crypto broker was, and the implication of Monica receiving secret payments from him was devastating. Cameron filed his emergency ex parte custody lawsuit at 9 o'clock this morning. I continued, stepping 1 inch closer to her trembling frame. The family court judge reviewed the federally verified DNA test and granted the emergency motion immediately. Cameron's legal team is currently finalizing the paperwork to seize your son and permanently strip you of all parental rights. Your biological meal ticket is officially gone, Monica. Monica shook her head violently, tears suddenly pooling in her heavily mascaraed eyes. "Stop it!" she whimpered, backing away from me until her hip hit the vanity counter. "You are lying. You are just lying to scare me." But I was not finished. The medical revelation was just the appetizer. The financial execution was the main course. "While Cameron is legally taking your child, I am legally taking your freedom," I stated, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that completely paralyzed her. "Did you really think you could use your luxury real estate license to wash $8 million of stolen corporate capital through Delaware shell companies without leaving a massive digital footprint?" The powder room fell dead silent. The executive wives stared at Monica in absolute horror, instinctively backing away from her, as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Embezzling from the firm was a severe crime, but bringing a money laundering syndicate into their social circle was an unforgivable sin. "Money laundering," I announced, ensuring the federal charge hung heavily in the air. "The authorities are currently drafting the warrants to permanently revoke your real estate license and seize the Bellevue mansion. You facilitated a massive domestic criminal syndicate. You are not a wealthy elite socialite, Monica. You are an unemployed fraud facing a decade in a federal penitentiary." The sheer magnitude of the reality finally broke her completely. The alcohol-fueled bravado entirely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a terrified hollow shell. Monica let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying her face in her trembling hands. She did not try to defend herself. She did not try to construct another lie or hurl another insult. The illusion was entirely incinerated. She turned and practically ran toward the heavy wooden door, shoving it open and fleeing out into the crowded hallway, leaving her half-empty champagne flute abandoned on the marble counter. I smoothed the silk fabric of my emerald gown, picked up my digital tablet, and walked past the stunned executive wives. The powder room warm-up was officially over. It was time to head upstairs to the glass boardroom and finish the corporate slaughter. The VIP glass boardroom was suspended directly above the Grand Symphony Ballroom, offering a sprawling, unobstructed view of the elite charity gala below. The thick, soundproof glass entirely eliminated the music and the chatter, creating an atmosphere of absolute suffocating silence. The long rectangular table was carved from a single slab of polished black walnut, surrounded by high-backed leather executive chairs. I walked into the room projecting total unshakable authority and took my seat at the end of the table, opening my digital tablet and connecting it directly to the massive presentation monitor mounted on the far wall. Mr. Carmichael, the chief executive officer, entered the boardroom a moment later. He carried a sleek silver briefcase and wore an expression carved from solid granite. He was not here to negotiate or listen to corporate excuses. He was here to amputate a cancerous liability from his multi-billion-dollar firm. He sat at the head of the table, folding his hands neatly in front of him, and waited for the execution to begin. Two large private security guards escorted Greg into the boardroom. They did not gently guide him. They practically marched him through the double glass doors and forced him into the chair directly across from me. The guards stepped back, taking up positions near the exit, ensuring Greg had absolutely no avenue of escape. Greg looked entirely destroyed. The custom-tailored black tuxedo he had worn so proudly less than an hour ago was now a wrinkled mess. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he stared wildly between his furious boss and his cold, calculating ex-wife. He knew he was backed into a corner, but his massive, arrogant ego refused to surrender without a fight. He still believed he could talk his way out of the federal snare. "Mr. Carmichael." Greg began, his voice a frantic, breathless rush, as he leaned forward, resting his trembling hands on the polished walnut table. "Sir, I can explain everything. I swear to you this is a massive misunderstanding. Diana is trying to frame me because she is bitter about our divorce. The system flagged my terminal because I was running a routine, unauthorized compliance check on a suspicious civilian account to protect the firm. There is no breach. There is no stolen capital. I am a dedicated senior vice president. I have brought in millions for this institution. You cannot just take the word of a disgruntled ex-wife over your top earner." Mr. Carmichael did not blink. He did not raise his voice or show a single flicker of sympathy. He simply turned his icy gaze away from Greg and looked directly at me. "Proceed with the audit, Diana." Mr. Carmichael commanded, his voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. I tapped the screen of my digital tablet, instantly illuminating the massive presentation monitor on the wall. A high-resolution encrypted data map filled the screen, highlighting the complex interconnected web of corporate accounts, offshore routing numbers, and localized Delaware shell companies. Greg immediately froze, his frantic pleading dying in his throat as he stared at the exact digital blueprint of his entire criminal empire. "This is not a simple internal compliance error. Mr. Carmichael," I began, my voice perfectly flat and analytical, designed specifically to cut through Greg's frantic lies. "What you are looking at is a highly sophisticated systematic embezzlement ring executed directly from Greg's executive terminal over the course of the last 18 months. I swiped my finger across the tablet, zooming in on the upper left quadrant of the digital map. Greg leveraged his senior administrative clearance to isolate high-yield alternative investment portfolios belonging to your top-tier clients, I explained, pointing a sleek laser pointer at the specific corporate ledgers. He focused specifically on clients who moved massive amounts of unregulated capital, making it easier to disguise phantom deficits as standard market fluctuations. He targeted Cameron's crypto trusts, siphoning exactly $3.5 million under the guise of an algorithm error. Over the course of a year, Greg systematically bled $8 million of legitimate corporate capital directly from the firm's holding accounts. Greg jumped out of his leather chair, his face flushed a deep mottled purple. "That is a lie," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "You fabricated those ledgers. You hacked into my terminal and planted those numbers to destroy me." "Sit down, Greg," Mr. Carmichael growled, the sheer force of his command echoing off the soundproof glass. Greg slowly sank back into his chair, swallowing hard as the last desperate remnants of his defense completely evaporated. I tapped the tablet again, transitioning the monitor to display the Mountain of Delaware LLC registration documents and the localized real estate escrow transfer receipts to bypass the firm's automated federal compliance checks. Greg needed a domestic vehicle to wash the stolen capital before moving it offshore. I continued mapping the money laundering cycle with lethal precision. He utilized his new wife Monica, who acquired her luxury real estate license specifically for this purpose. Greg wired the stolen $8 million directly into an escrow account controlled by Monica's brokerage. She then executed a series of fraudulent phantom property sales between anonymous Delaware shell companies. Apex Holdings, Pinnacle Northwest Properties, Emerald Horizon Assets. I highlighted the IP address logs linking the transactions perfectly together. Every time a vacant commercial lot changed hands, the embezzled money was legally washed through the escrow account, emerging as clean, legitimate real estate capital gains, I stated, ensuring Mr. Carmichael understood the absolute severity of the liability. And every single authorization ping required to manage this localized money laundering syndicate originated from the exact same static 12-digit IP address. Greg's personal executive terminal located right here in this building. The silence in the boardroom was absolute and terrifying. The CEO stared at the presentation monitor, his silver hair catching the sharp glare of the screen. He was watching his firm's flawless reputation being violently ripped apart. He understood that Greg had not just stolen money, he had actively weaponized the institution, turning a trusted wealth management firm into a digital hub for a massive federal crime syndicate. I swiped my tablet one final time, bringing up the ultimate piece of irrefutable evidence. The monitor displayed the audio waveform of the phone call Greg had made to me from his desk the day before. I pressed play, and the sound of Greg's frantic, breathless voice filled the glass boardroom. "I will pay you," Greg's recorded voice echoed through the speakers. "I will give you $50,000 right now. Clean cash wired straight to a secure account of your choosing. Just wipe the server, Diana. Please. 100,000. I can liquidate a discrete fund right now. I can give you $500,000, Diana. $500,000 in clean, untraceable cash." The audio file clicked off, returning the room to a heavy, suffocating silence. He explicitly attempted to bribe a witness, offering $500,000 to delete the server logs and cover up his federal crimes, I concluded, closing my digital tablet and resting my hands smoothly on the table. "The audit is complete, Mr. Carmichael. The evidence is irrefutable. Your senior vice president is a federal criminal." Greg put his head down on the polished walnut table, burying his face in his trembling arms. He let out a loud, pathetic, whimpering sound, the sound of a man who realized his entire universe had just violently collapsed. The custom tuxedo, the massive executive bonuses, the $2 million Bellevue illusion, it was all entirely incinerated. He was completely trapped, surrounded by the towering walls of justice he had arrogantly tried to manipulate, and I was the one who had just handed the executioner the blade. Mr. Carmichael did not offer a single word of comfort to the weeping man across the table. He simply stared at Greg with an expression of absolute, profound disgust. The chief executive officer of a multi-billion-dollar financial institution did not reach his position by showing mercy to thieves who weaponized his corporate network. He sat perfectly still, waiting for the pathetic display to end. Greg slowly lifted his head from his arms. His face was a tragic mask of smeared sweat and raw terror. He looked at Mr. Carmichael and realized the silence was not an invitation to explain. It was a death sentence. The sheer primal instinct for self-preservation completely overrode whatever tiny shred of dignity Greg had left. He pushed his chair back, the leather scraping loudly against the polished marble floor, and slid completely out of his seat. Greg dropped heavily to his knees. The sharp impact echoed in the soundproof glass boardroom. He crawled forward on the floor, dragging his ruined custom tuxedo across the marble until he was kneeling directly beside the CEO's chair. "Mr. Carmichael, please!" Greg begged, his voice a high-pitched, frantic whine. "I can fix this. I swear on my life I can put every single penny back. I will liquidate the Cayman accounts tonight. I will immediately wire the $8 million back into the corporate holding ledgers. I will sell the Bellevue estate tomorrow morning. I will sell my cars. I will empty my legitimate retirement portfolios to cover any institutional fines or compliance penalties. Just please do not hand this audit over to the authorities. If the government gets involved, my entire life is over. I will do whatever you want. I will resign quietly. Just let me put the money back." Mr. Carmichael looked down at the kneeling wealth manager as if Greg were a diseased rat that had just crawled out of a sewer grate. "You cannot simply put the money back, Greg," Mr. Carmichael stated, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying register. "You did not make a clerical error. You committed premeditated federal wire fraud. You ran a money laundering syndicate through my corporate mainframe. You compromised the financial security of our top-tier clients and severely damaged the pristine reputation of this firm. You are a cancer, Greg, and I am surgically removing you from my institution." Greg opened his mouth to launch into another desperate, agonizing plea, but he never got the chance to speak. The heavy glass doors of the VIP boardroom swung open with an explosive, forceful slam. The sudden noise shattered the tense atmosphere, causing Greg to physically flinch and cower against the leg of the conference table. Kendrick stepped into the room. My brother-in-law looked like the absolute, undeniable manifestation of federal justice. He was dressed in his signature razor-sharp black suit, his silver federal badge gleaming brightly against his belt. But Kendrick did not arrive alone. Flanking him on both sides were 4 heavily armed federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers. 2 jackets featured the bold yellow lettering of the FBI. The other 2 bore the insignia of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The cavalry had officially arrived. Greg Campbell Kendrick announced, his deep, resonant baritone filling every single corner of the glass boardroom. He looked down at the kneeling, trembling man with a gaze of unfiltered clinical judgment. Greg let out a loud, gasping sob, scrambling backward across the marble floor like a cornered animal trying to escape a predator. He hit the base of the presentation monitor and curled his knees into his chest, violently shaking his head. "No," Greg whimpered, tears streaming freely down his face. "No, please. Diana, tell them to stop." I sat perfectly still at the end of the walnut table, smoothly closing the cover of my digital tablet. I did not say a word. I had already delivered my verdict. Mr. Carmichael stood up from his executive leather chair, towering over the pathetic wealth manager. "Greg, you are officially terminated from this firm, effective immediately." Mr. Carmichael declared, his voice carrying the lethal weight of absolute corporate execution. "Your access credentials are permanently revoked. Your corporate portfolios are frozen. And I am personally filing a civil lawsuit against you for institutional damages." Kendrick gave a short, sharp nod to the federal agents standing beside him. "Execute the warrant," Kendrick commanded. 2 massive FBI agents stepped forward, moving with swift, tactical precision. They grabbed Greg by his shoulders, hauling him violently up from the marble floor. Greg thrashed weakly, his legs giving out beneath him, but the agents held him up with effortless strength. They twisted his arms roughly behind his back. "Greg Campbell, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and racketeering," the lead FBI agent stated, reciting the Miranda rights with a cold, mechanical efficiency as he pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Greg's wrists echoed loudly in the quiet boardroom. It was the absolute final sound of his freedom being permanently extinguished. The golden boy, the untouchable financial genius, the arrogant husband who had mocked my biology in a hospital hallway, was now officially a shackled federal prisoner. Kendrick stepped closer to Greg, looking him dead in the eye. "You thought you could extort my family," Kendrick said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You thought you could hide behind your expensive suits and your offshore accounts, but you forgot one crucial detail, Greg. You are not the smartest person in the room. You never were." "Take him out," Kendrick ordered, stepping aside to clear the path. The agents did not take Greg out through the discreet rear service elevators. That was not the protocol for a high-profile white-collar raid. They marched him directly out of the glass boardroom and toward the grand sweeping staircase that led straight down into the center of the charity gala. I stood up from my chair, picking up my black leather clutch and my digital tablet. I walked to the edge of the glass balcony, looking down at the massive ballroom below. Mr. Carmichael stood beside me, his hands clasped firmly behind his back, as we watched the absolute public annihilation of Greg's social standing. The moment the FBI agents escorted Greg onto the top of the grand staircase, the live orchestra abruptly stopped playing. The cheerful high society chatter instantly died, completely replaced by a wave of collective horrified gasps. Over 500 of Seattle's wealthiest elites, corporate peers, and top-tier clients turned their heads simultaneously to witness the spectacle. Greg was marched slowly down the marble steps. The bright crystal chandeliers illuminated his ruined tuxedo, his tear-stained face, and the heavy steel handcuffs secured behind his back. Society photographers who had been hired to capture glamorous red carpet moments instantly swarmed the bottom of the staircase. The bright white flashes of their cameras erupted like strobe lights, capturing every single agonizing second of his humiliating perp walk. Greg tried to bow his head to hide his face from the blinding camera flashes, but the FBI agents kept him moving forward at a relentless brisk pace. He was paraded directly through the center of the Grand Symphony Ballroom. The wealthy executives who had shaken his hand an hour ago now physically backed away from him, looking at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. He was a corporate pariah, a confirmed thief being dragged out of his own prestigious event in chains. I watched the heavy mahogany double doors of the ballroom swing open, allowing the federal agents to march him out into the cold, rainy Seattle night. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles waiting outside cast a harsh, chaotic glow into the elegant foyer. And just like that, the untouchable wealth manager was completely erased from the elite world he had sacrificed everything to conquer. Exactly 3 months after the flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles faded into the Seattle night, I walked into the sprawling mahogany chamber of the federal family court. The legal fallout from the charity gala raid had been swift, absolute, and utterly devastating for the people who had tried to destroy me. Because Greg had utilized a federal banking network to launder money and commit perjury during a divorce settlement, the jurisdiction was elevated. This was not a standard civil mediation. This was a combined asset forfeiture and family court hearing presided over by a federal magistrate with zero tolerance for corporate criminals. I sat at the petitioner table wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. My posture was rigid, my hands resting calmly on the polished wooden surface. Kendrick sat directly beside me, acting as my lead counsel, his massive frame exuding the lethal, quiet confidence of a federal attorney who had already won the war. On the opposite side of the aisle, the reality of the last 90 days was physically painted onto the antagonists' faces. Greg was escorted into the courtroom by 2 armed bailiffs. The custom Italian tuxedos and silk ties were permanently gone. He was wearing a bright neon orange prison jumpsuit provided by the federal holding facility. Heavy steel chains were secured around his waist, binding his wrists and his ankles, jingling loudly with every pathetic, shuffling step he took. He looked gaunt, his skin pale, and his hair unkempt. The absolute terror of maximum security lockup had completely stripped away his arrogant vice president persona, leaving behind a hollow, broken shell of a man. Sitting at a separate respondent table entirely isolated from Greg was Monica. Her descent into poverty had been spectacularly rapid. The SEC had instantly frozen her bank accounts and seized the $2 million Bellevue mansion as a product of money laundering. She was currently renting a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city. She wore a faded beige dress, her hair completely devoid of its expensive salon styling. She looked terrified, chewing on her fingernails as she stared at the judge. Seated at the third table was Cameron. The billionaire crypto broker wore a custom charcoal suit surrounded by three of the most expensive litigators on the West Coast. He looked completely unbothered, a predator waiting to collect his prize. Judge Reynolds, a stern federal magistrate with decades of experience on the bench, struck his wooden gavel sharply against the sounding block. The loud crack silenced the room instantly. "We have two distinct dockets to resolve today," Judge Reynolds announced, his voice echoing with absolute judicial authority. "We will begin with the emergency custody and paternity petition filed by the intervening party regarding the 1-year-old male child." The judge picked up the sealed medical dossier, reading the verified federal lab results into the public record. "The court has reviewed the mandatory biometric screenings and the subsequent independent DNA tests," Judge Reynolds stated, looking down his nose at Greg. "The medical evidence is irrefutable. Greg Campbell suffers from complete irreversible azoospermia. He possesses zero biological connection to the child. The DNA results confirm with absolute certainty that Cameron is the sole biological father." Greg closed his eyes, dropping his chin to his chest as the final nail was hammered into the coffin of his manufactured family. Furthermore, Judge Reynolds continued, turning his sharp glare toward Monica. "This court has reviewed the extensive digital evidence provided by federal investigators regarding the mother's conduct. Monica utilized the child as leverage to extort secret offshore cryptocurrency transfers from the biological father. She is currently under federal indictment for facilitating a domestic money laundering syndicate. She represents a severe financial and moral danger to the well-being of this infant." Monica let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying her face in her hands. "I am granting full physical and sole legal custody to the biological father immediately," Judge Reynolds ruled, striking his gavel again. "Monica is completely stripped of all parental rights. Supervised visitation is denied pending the outcome of her federal criminal trial. The child will be surrendered to Cameron's legal team before the end of the day." Cameron did not smile. He simply gave a curt nod of acknowledgement, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. He had reclaimed his bloodline and utterly destroyed the woman who tried to extort him. Now Judge Reynolds pivoted seamlessly, his expression darkening, as he picked up the massive forensic financial dossier I had compiled. "We move to the matter of the invalidated divorce settlement and the civil asset forfeiture." The judge looked directly at Greg, who was physically trembling in his orange jumpsuit. "Greg Campbell, you sat in a family court 1 year ago and swore under penalty of perjury that your total marital assets were fully disclosed." Judge Reynolds's voice dropped to a low, lethal register. "You actively deceived your ex-wife, you deceived your legal counsel, and you deceived the judicial system of the United States. You utilized your executive banking clearance to embezzle $8 million from your own clients, funneling that stolen capital into Cayman Island shadow accounts, while simultaneously pleading poverty during your divorce mediation." Greg's public defender placed a warning hand on his client's arm, ensuring Greg kept his mouth completely shut. "Because you committed egregious fraud upon the court to secure the original divorce decree, that settlement is officially voided with extreme prejudice," Judge Reynolds declared. "A standard 50-50 split of marital assets is entirely off the table. This court recognizes the unparalleled forensic work executed by the petitioner Diana to uncover this massive criminal syndicate." The judge picked up his pen, staring Greg dead in the eye. "I am awarding Diana 100% of the $8 million recovered from the Cayman Island accounts." Judge Reynolds ruled, his words landing like physical blows against Greg's fragile sanity. "The federal government has successfully repatriated those funds, and they will be transferred directly into the petitioner's private accounts by the end of the business week." Greg let out a strangled, gasping wheeze, the sheer magnitude of the financial loss completely crushing the breath from his lungs. But the judge was not finished. Furthermore, due to the malicious nature of your extortion attempts and the severe emotional and financial distress inflicted upon the petitioner, I am ordering severe punitive damages, Judge Reynolds continued relentlessly. Every single remaining legitimate asset attached to your name is hereby seized. Your corporate 401k, your legitimate retirement portfolios, and the remaining equity from the seized Bellevue estate will be liquidated and awarded to Diana to cover her legal fees and investigative costs. Greg slumped forward in his chair, the heavy steel chains rattling violently against the wood table. He was completely wiped out. The untouchable wealth manager now possessed a negative net worth. He had absolutely zero liquid capital to hire a private defense attorney for his upcoming federal embezzlement trial, guaranteeing he would be relying on an overworked public defender to save him from a 20-year prison sentence. You attempted to financially starve your ex-wife and leave her homeless. Judge Reynolds concluded, striking the gavel with explosive force. Instead, you have bankrupted yourself. This civil hearing is adjourned. Bailiffs remand the prisoner back to federal holding. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the absolute, undeniable victory. My forensic audit had not just exposed a lie, it had fundamentally rewritten reality, delivering flawless, devastating justice. I picked up my leather briefcase and stood up, ready to walk out of the courtroom and watch the final pathetic ashes of their lives blow away in the wind. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open, spilling the intense drama of the hearing out into the sprawling marble corridor. I stepped out first, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored navy suit, Kendrick walking in perfect stride beside me. The air outside the chamber felt instantly cleaner, completely devoid of the suffocating panic that had filled the room. But the absolute devastation I had orchestrated was not quite finished playing out. Moments later, the doors opened again and Cameron emerged. The billionaire crypto broker looked like a man who had just conquered a small country. He was surrounded by his elite legal team, completely ignoring the flashing cameras of the local press who had gathered at the far end of the hallway. Nestled securely in his arms, dressed in a tiny designer suit that likely cost more than my first car, was the 1-year-old baby boy. The child was quiet, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire life trajectory had just been permanently altered. Cameron began walking toward the private elevator bank, his security detail flanking him closely. But before he could take more than 5 steps, a desperate, hysterical shriek echoed down the marble corridor. "Cameron, wait please." Monica came bursting through the courtroom doors, practically tripping over the hem of her faded beige dress. Her face was a horrific mask of smeared mascara, red blotchy skin, and unadulterated terror. She had just been legally erased from her own child's life and permanently stripped of her real estate license. She was facing federal criminal charges and absolute poverty, and she was desperate to cling to the only life raft she thought she had left. She sprinted across the hallway, throwing herself directly into the path of Cameron's security detail. The massive guards instantly raised their arms, forming an impenetrable physical barrier between the weeping woman and the billionaire. "You can't just take him," Monica sobbed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine as she reached out toward the baby. "He's my son. I birthed him. You have to let me see him, Cameron. You can't just throw me away like trash. I loved you." Cameron stopped walking. He did not look at her with anger. He looked at her with the absolute freezing indifference one might reserve for a crushed insect on the sidewalk. He adjusted his grip on the baby, ensuring the child was comfortable against his chest. "You loved the $2 million house," Cameron corrected her, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried clearly across the quiet corridor. "You loved the offshore crypto transfers and the platinum black cards. You used my son as a pawn to fund your pathetic illusion of a glamorous life. And now the game is over, Monica." "I have nothing!" Monica shrieked, tears streaming down her face as she sank to her knees on the cold marble floor. "The SEC took the house. They froze my accounts. I'm sleeping in a motel, Cameron. Please just give me a chance. I'll sign a prenup. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me with nothing." "You made your choices." Cameron replied, his tone completely devoid of mercy. You chose to sleep with me behind your husband's back, you chose to extort me, and you chose to participate in a federal money laundering syndicate. Enjoy the consequences. Cameron gave a brief nod to his security detail. The guard smoothly stepped forward physically, forcing Monica back against the wall to clear the path. Cameron walked past her, the sharp clack of his expensive Italian leather shoes echoing down the hallway. He stepped into the private elevator, the silver doors sliding shut and permanently erasing him and the baby from Monica's reality forever. Monica collapsed against the marble wall, burying her face in her hands and letting out a loud, guttural wail of complete despair. She had played the ultimate game of high-stakes manipulation, believing her beauty and cunning made her untouchable. Now she was completely bankrupt, childless, and utterly alone. But her humiliation was not yet complete. The heavy courtroom doors swung open one final time. Two armed federal bailiffs marched out into the corridor flanking Greg. The neon orange prison jumpsuit completely swallowed his frame, the bright color a glaring contrast to the elegant marble surroundings. The heavy steel chains around his waist and ankles rattled loudly, announcing his complete subjugation to the federal justice system. Greg looked physically ill. The judge's ruling had completely wiped out his entire net worth, leaving him in a state of catatonic shock. He shuffled down the hallway, his head bowed, his eyes fixed blankly on the floor. Monica heard the rattling chains and looked up. The sight of her ruined ex-husband seemed to ignite a final venomous spark within her. The despair instantly morphed into pure, unadulterated hatred. She scrambled to her feet, her hands balled into tight fists, and lunged toward him. "You ruined my life!" Monica screamed, her voice tearing with raw, vicious fury. She pointed a shaking finger directly at his face, oblivious to the armed bailiffs stepping forward to intercept her. "You promised me everything. You promised me a mansion and a perfect life, and you couldn't even give me a real child. You dragged me into your pathetic little embezzlement scheme, and now the federal government is taking everything I own." Greg stopped walking, lifting his head to look at her. The man who had once been so obsessed with projecting an image of total alpha dominance now looked like a broken, pathetic shell. The venomous insults from the woman he had destroyed his marriage for did not seem to register. He just stared at her with hollow, dead eyes. "You are just a defective, sterile thief," Monica continued to shriek, spittle flying from her lips. "You used me. You destroyed me. I hope you rot in federal prison for the rest of your miserable life." Greg did not scream back. He did not try to defend his shattered ego. He simply let out a weak, pathetic wheeze, a sound of absolute, total defeat. The bailiffs grabbed his arms firmly, pulling him away from the hysterical woman and marching him down the corridor toward the freight elevator that would transport him back to his maximum security cell. I stood near the main exit with Kendrick, watching the final spectacular collapse of the two people who had gleefully plotted my destruction. They were drowning in the exact toxic floodwaters they had spent years pumping into my life. The golden boy and the beautiful gold digger, tearing each other apart in a public hallway, stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their dignity. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Anger requires an emotional investment, and I was entirely bankrupt of any feelings regarding these two pathetic strangers. The cancer had been surgically removed from my life, and I was completely free. I adjusted the strap of my leather briefcase and turned my back on the screaming woman in the hallway. I pushed open the heavy glass exit doors of the courthouse, stepping out into the bright, crisp Seattle afternoon, leaving the ashes of their ruined lives in the dark corridor where they belonged. Later that week, the final federal wire cleared. Exactly $8 million legally awarded by the federal magistrate settled securely into my private offshore and domestic portfolios. I had completely liquidated my old life and upgraded to a sprawling, high-security penthouse occupying the entire top floor of a premier glass tower in downtown Seattle. The building was a fortress. It featured a private underground garage, biometric elevator access, and a 24-hour armed concierge team. It was designed specifically to keep the noise and the toxicity of the outside world completely shut out. It was a rainy Thursday morning when the intercom on my kitchen island chimed. James, the head concierge, spoke with a tense, apologetic tone. "Ms. Campbell, I apologize for the intrusion. There is a woman in the lobby demanding to see you. She bypassed the outer courtyard gate behind a delivery truck. She claims to be your mother-in-law and is becoming highly disruptive. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Seattle skyline. Keep her in the lobby, James. I replied, my voice perfectly level. I will be right down. I did not rush. I took my time putting on a sharp-tailored beige trench coat over my dark slacks. When the private elevator doors opened into the sprawling marble lobby, the scene playing out near the front desk was a stark, pathetic contrast to the opulent surroundings. Patricia was standing near the velvet seating area arguing frantically with two large security guards. The arrogant, untouchable, elitist matriarch who had paraded around the hospital corridor in a pristine Chanel suit was completely gone. She looked like she had not slept in days. She was wearing a wrinkled, faded sweater, her expensive dyed blonde hair pulled back into a messy, unkempt knot. She was clutching a scuffed leather handbag tightly against her chest like a physical shield. The absolute devastation of Greg's federal indictment and the civil asset forfeiture had completely shattered her aristocratic illusion. The Campbell family was officially bankrupt. She saw me step out of the elevator and immediately broke away from the guards rushing across the polished marble floor. Diana. Patricia gasped, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. The security guards moved to intercept her, but I held up a single hand signaling them to stop. They stepped back, allowing her to approach, but remained close enough to intervene the second she crossed a physical boundary. You have exactly 2 minutes, Patricia. I stated, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any welcoming warmth. And then you are leaving this building permanently. Patricia did not sneer. She did not throw insults about my biology or my career. The sheer gravity of her son's impending doom had crushed every ounce of pride she possessed. Her knees visibly buckled, and right there in the pristine, brightly lit lobby of my luxury building, the great elitist matriarch completely collapsed. She fell to her knees on the cold stone floor. Genuine, desperate tears spilled over her eyelashes, tracking rapidly down her pale, makeup-free cheeks. Please, Diana. Patricia sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my trench coat. I am begging you. I have absolutely nowhere else to go. I have called everyone, every single one of Greg's friends, his colleagues, his country club associates. They all blocked my number. The bank foreclosed on the Bellevue house yesterday. The federal authorities froze my personal checking accounts because I was listed as an emergency beneficiary on his trust. I have nothing left. I looked down at her, my resting heart rate remaining perfectly steady. I did not pull my coat away. I simply watched her drown in her own manufactured consequences. That sounds like a severe financial crisis, I replied, my tone clinical and detached. But it is not my problem. You have $8 million, Patricia wept, her voice echoing loudly in the high-ceilinged lobby, drawing the attention of the concierge staff. The judge gave you everything my son worked for. You took every last penny. The public defender assigned to Greg's case is completely useless. He is telling Greg to take a plea deal for 15 years in a maximum security prison. 15 years, Diana. He will not survive that. He is an executive. He is not built for a federal penitentiary. Patricia clasped her hands together in front of her chest, looking up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. I just need a loan, just $500,000 to retain a premier federal defense attorney. You have so much. You can spare a fraction of it to save his life. I will pay you back. I will get a job. I will do whatever it takes. Please have mercy on us. She took a ragged, shaking breath and played her final, most pathetic card. We are family, Diana. I loved you like my own daughter for 10 years. You cannot just abandon your family like this. The sheer unmitigated audacity of her plea hung heavily in the air. I stared at the woman kneeling at my feet. For a decade, she had subjected me to a relentless campaign of passive-aggressive cruelty. She had scrutinized my body, criticized my career, and enabled her son's toxic narcissism at every single turn. Family. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp smile. Where was this deep family loyalty last week, Patricia? Where was it when you stood in a crowded hospital corridor and screamed at the top of your lungs that I was a barren, defective failure? Patricia flinched as if I had physically struck her, her sobbing hitching in her throat. You did not treat me like a daughter. I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that sliced right through her tears. You treated me like an underperforming corporate asset. You laughed in my face while you bragged about the millions your son embezzled. You practically cheered when Cameron threatened to take the baby away, completely oblivious to the fact that you were watching your own legacy burn to the ground. You chose your side, Patricia. You chose the thief and the gold digger. I was wrong, Patricia wailed, bowing her head so low it almost touched the marble floor. I was a foolish, arrogant woman. I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. Please, Diana. He is my only son. If he goes to prison for 15 years, I will die alone. Please. I looked at her shaking, pathetic frame. I did not feel a single flicker of sympathy. I had completely closed the ledger on the Campbell family. The accounts were settled, and the debt had been paid in full. I smoothly took a step backward, pulling the fabric of my coat out of her desperate grasp. I looked her dead in the eye, channeling the exact same venomous arrogance Greg had used against me the day he thought he had won. Leaving your son to his fate is the best decision I ever made, I stated, feeding Greg's original cruel words right back into the atmosphere. Patricia gasped, her eyes widening in absolute horrifying realization. She knew exactly whose words those were. She knew there was absolutely no mercy left to be found. The iron door was permanently sealed. I turned my attention to the two security guards standing a few feet away. Security, remove this woman from the premises. If she ever steps foot near this building again, call the police and press formal trespassing charges. The guard stepped forward immediately, grabbing Patricia by her arms and hauling her roughly up from the marble floor. She did not fight them. The last remaining ounce of fight had been completely drained from her soul. She just hung limp between the two large men, sobbing hysterically as they dragged her backward toward the heavy glass revolving doors. I did not watch her leave. I turned around and walked back toward the private elevator bank. I pressed the call button, listening to the soft, pleasant chime as the doors slid open. I stepped inside, ascending back up to my high-security sanctuary, leaving the weeping, broken remnants of my past on the cold floor of the lobby, exactly where they belonged. Exactly 365 days after I left Patricia weeping on the marble floor of my lobby, I stood on the polished teak deck of a private chartered yacht. The vessel cut smoothly through the deep sapphire waters of Puget Sound, leaving a brilliant white wake trailing behind us. The afternoon sun beat down, warming my shoulders, while a crisp, salty ocean breeze swept through my hair. The Seattle skyline towered in the distance, a beautiful, sprawling testament to the empire I had successfully conquered. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the absolute intoxicating scent of total freedom. I held a crystal fluid of vintage champagne in my right hand, watching the golden bubbles rise rapidly to the surface. Standing directly to my left was my sister Sylvia. She was completely healed from her surgery, wearing a flowing white sundress and a bright, vibrant smile that radiated pure joy. Standing to my right was Kendrick. He had traded his intimidating black federal suits for a casual tailored linen button-down shirt. He looked relaxed, leaning against the polished mahogany railing of the yacht. We were not just celebrating the anniversary of my ultimate victory. We were celebrating the dawn of an entirely new era. I raised my glass, and the three of us clinked our crystal flutes together. The sharp, clear chime echoed perfectly over the sound of the crashing waves. I did not take the $8 million the federal magistrate awarded me and quietly retire to a tropical island. Hiding was never in my nature. Instead, I took that massive injection of liquid capital and utilized my extensive professional network to build an absolute fortress. I launched my own elite private forensic auditing firm located directly in the financial heart of downtown Seattle. I leased a sprawling top-floor office space featuring state-of-the-art encrypted servers and hired a dedicated team of ruthless forensic accountants, digital trace experts, and former federal compliance officers. My firm specializes entirely in high-net-worth asset recovery. We take on hostile divorce cases representing women whose manipulative husbands are actively attempting to hide marital assets through complex corporate structures, offshore trusts, and shadow shell companies. I use the exact same aggressive digital hunting techniques I used against Greg to systematically dismantle financial abusers. We rip apart their fraudulent ledgers, expose their secret crypto wallets, and ensure that no woman ever has to walk away from a marriage empty-handed just because her husband thinks he is smarter than the law. We are currently the most feared and highly sought-after financial investigative agency on the entire West Coast. My calendar is booked solid for the next 2 years. The people who tried to destroy me did not fare nearly as well. The federal justice system does not offer early parole or lenient plea deals for executives who weaponize federally insured corporate mainframes to run domestic money laundering syndicates. Greg was denied bail entirely after the Charity Gala raid. He sat in a county jail cell for 6 months until his trial. With zero liquid capital remaining to hire a private defense team, he was forced to rely on an overwhelmed public defender. The digital evidence I provided was entirely unassailable. A federal jury convicted him on every single charge in less than 4 hours. Greg is currently serving a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary in California. The arrogant vice president who used to scream at his assistants if his custom silk ties were not perfectly pressed now wears a standardized scratchy orange cotton uniform. He spends 23 hours a day locked inside a bleak concrete cell measuring exactly 8 feet by 10 feet. His multi-million-dollar executive portfolios are permanently gone. His prestigious country club memberships are revoked. His wealthy peers completely erased his name from their contact list the exact second the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists. He is a ghost. He is entirely irrelevant. Monica experienced a different but equally devastating kind of prison. After Cameron successfully filed the emergency injunction and permanently stripped her of all parental rights, the federal authorities moved in. The government permanently revoked her luxury real estate license and seized every single designer asset she possessed. She narrowly avoided federal prison by aggressively testifying against Greg, but her felony conviction for facilitating a financial conspiracy made traditional corporate employment completely impossible. Today, the woman who used to flaunt a $2 million Bellevue mansion and massive diamond rings works a grueling minimum wage retail job at a discount department store in a rundown strip mall. She spends her entire day on her feet folding cheap synthetic clothing and enduring the loud complaints of rude, impatient customers. She lives in a tiny, cramped studio apartment, constantly struggling to pay her utility bills. Her manufactured beauty faded rapidly under the crushing weight of severe poverty and constant exhaustion. She has absolutely no wealth, no status, and no child. She is completely alone, drowning in the miserable reality she built with her own 2 hands. I turned my attention away from the distant city skyline and looked at my sister and my brother-in-law. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my vintage champagne, letting the crisp, expensive taste wash over my palate. A year ago, I stood in a crowded hospital corridor and listened to a man tell me my entire existence was worthless because of my biological limitations. He tried to reduce my value to my reproductive organs. He tried to leverage his corporate power to leave me terrified and broke. But he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of real power. Power does not come from a bloodline or a manipulated corporate title. Power comes from absolute, unshakable competence. It comes from keeping your heart rate steady and your mind perfectly sharp while the people around you succumb to their own toxic emotional chaos. I survived their ambush. I dismantled their lies. I executed a flawless financial slaughter that completely eradicated them from the elite society they worshipped, and I walked away with their millions to build an untouchable empire of my own. The ultimate victory was never just about sending them to ruin. It was about proving that my worth was entirely defined by my own brilliant mind. As the yacht sailed smoothly toward the golden horizon, I smiled. The absolute best revenge you can ever inflict upon your enemies is not just destroying their lives. It is living a wildly successful, entirely untouchable life of your own. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone convince you that you are anything less than formidable. The most powerful lesson from Diana's story is that true strength lies in unshakable competence and emotional control rather than arrogance or tearing others down. When faced with ultimate betrayal and public humiliation, Diana refused to resort to petty screaming matches. Instead, she relied entirely on her intellect, professional skills, and undeniable facts to secure absolute justice. Greg and Monica built their fragile lives on deception and toxic validation, which quickly crumbled under real scrutiny. Diana's journey reminds us that staying grounded in our own capabilities makes us truly untouchable. Share a time you stood your ground and comment below. 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 Comment below.